Our book today is The Poisoned City, Flint's Water and the American Urban Tragedy by Anna Clark. This is from the prologue. On a hot day in the summer of 2014 in the Civic Park neighborhood where Pastor R. Sherman McCathern preached in Flint, Michigan, water rushed out of a couple of fire hydrants. Puddles formed on the dry grass and splashed the skin of the delighted kids who ran through it. But the spray looked strange. The water was coming out dark as coffee for hours, McCathern remembered. The shock of it caught in his throat. Something is wrong here. Something had been wrong for months. That spring, Flint, under the direction of state officials, turned off the darkening water that it had relied on for the drinking water that it had relied on for nearly 50 years. The city planned to join a new regional system called the Carignondi Water Authority, and while it waited for the KWA to be built, it began bringing in its water from the Flint River. McCathern didn't pay much attention to the politicking around all this. He had enough to worry about with his busy parish. But after the switch, many of his neighbors grew alarmed at the water that flowed from their kitchen faucets and shower heads. They packed public meetings, wrote questioning letters, and protested at City Hall. They filled clear plastic bottles from their taps to show how the water looked brown or orange and sometimes had particulates floating in it. Showering seemed to be connected with skin rashes and hair loss. The water smelled foul. A sip of it put the taste of a cold metal coin on your tongue. But the authorities said everything was all right and you could drink it, so people did, McCathern said later. Residents were advised to run their faucets for a few minutes before using the water to get a clean flow. But as the months went by, the city plant tinkered with treatment and issued a few boil water advisories. State environmental officials said again and again that there was nothing to worry about. The water was just fine. Whatever their senses told them, whatever the whispers around town, whatever Flint's troubled history with powerful institutions telling them what was best for them, this wasn't actually hard for people like McCathern to believe. Public water systems are one of this country's most heroic accomplishments, a feat so successful that it's almost invisible. By making it a commonplace for clean water to be delivered to homes, businesses, and schools, we have saved untold lives from what today sound like antiquated diseases in a Charles Dickens novel: cholera, dysentery, typhoid fever. Here in Flint, it was instrumental in turning General Motors, founded in 1908 in Vehicle City, as the town was known, into a global economic giant. The advancing underground network of pipes defined the growing city and its metropolitan region, which boasted of being home to one of the strongest middle classes in the entire United States. McCathern is a tall, bald man with a thin mustache and a scratchy rasp in his baritone voice. At the time of the water switch, he had led the non-denominational Joy Tabernacle Church for about 15 years. It was founded in the YMCA in downtown Flint, where it held baptisms in the swimming pool. But in 2009, it made a home in Civic Park, where a Presbyterian church closed after 85 years and gave its sanctuary over to the young and hopeful congregation. By then, Civic Park, one of America's oldest subdivisions, was a desert of deserted, historically significant homes, the pastor said. Built between 1917 and 1919 by General Motors and DuPont and Company, along curving tree-lined boulevards, the tidy houses were designed for Flint's auto workers and their families. But over the years, the neighborhood was blighted by vacancy. Empty 2 stories with lurching front porches and crumbling roofs sat alongside crisply painted homes where Flint residents, they sometimes call themselves Flintoids or Flintstones, still live their lives. When the sound of gunshots on the street outside interrupted services, McCathern gave a nod to the church musicians, urging them to play louder. Some called Joy Tabernacle a thug church, he said, but McCathern saw the good. The young men filling his pews built a proud society, if not by getting their names on the honor roll, then by tagging their names with spray paint. In the end, people just want to be seen. The ghosts of the past went well beyond Civic Park. Between General Motors and the United Auto Workers, the city had been a flourishing hub for American innovation. There were more than 100 different manufacturing establishments in town. 10 of them employed at least 1,000 people each. And they not only made automobiles, but paints, varnishes, tools, dyes, cotton, textiles, and a wealth of other products. Flint had one of the highest per capita incomes in the entire nation. And despite being severely segregated, it was a magnet for African-American migrants from the South. When Vice President Hubert Humphrey stopped by during the campaign for the 1964 presidential election, he praised Flint for, quote, zooming ahead with unbelievable growth and progress. Workers earned wages that are very good, Humphrey said, and, quote, because of the great labor management program in the community over many years, there has been a constant rise in the standard of living, end quote. Away from the assembly lines and the executive suites, the people of Flint felt that the city just shouldn't be a place to work. It should also be a place to thrive. Charles Stewart Mott, an auto pioneer who became GM's single largest stockholder and three-term mayor, created a nationally renowned community schools program that provided education, skills-building workshops, and social influence and social services.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Wow, there is a lot going on. Welcome to the program today. This is remarkable, and happy new week to you. It's going to get to 103 this week here in Portland, so climate change is on the calendar. We will be talking about that a little later on today in the second hour. The IPCC is calling it Code Red. In our third hour, Dave Lindorff has an amazing new piece out in The Nation about a toxic coastal landfill, something that wasn't even on my radar screen. And I want to share with you all. That'll be in our third hour. Also in our second hour, Steve Hassan is going to, or is it Hassan? Hassan, yeah, is going to drop by. He's got this, well, the title to his piece is rather instructive. It's titled Good Way to Die, an AR-15 worshiping Moonies sect mobilized for January 6th is now recruiting the far right to its apocalyptic vision. We will hear from Stephen in the second hour of the program. But in this first hour of the program, there are three things in particular that I want to get to, and a couple of things that are just incidental to the day. For example, today was the anniversary of the U.S. dropping its second nuclear bomb, this one on Nagasaki. A total of 700,000 between Hiroshima and Nagasaki people were killed. That was in 1945. And there's a fascinating piece over at BBC. And in fact, it's titled The Forgotten Mine That Built the Atomic Bomb. And, you know, not only were we mining uranium here in the United States, but back in the 40s, we were importing very, very high-quality yellowcake uranium from Nigeria. And that, by the way, I mean, this is the same stuff. Remember when Joe Wilson came out and said Dick Cheney was lying about Saddam Hussein importing yellowcake from Nigeria? Well, that was the stuff that he was talking about. And Dick Cheney was lying about it in that case. But anyhow, that's going on. And it's the assassination also, the anniversary also of the celebration of Michael Brown by police, which, you know, sparked some substantial early, this has been going on for 400 years. People have been protesting violence. Black people have been protesting violence by white police. But so anyhow, it's that anniversary. But the main topics for the day that I want to get into, number one, our discussion thread. We started a new feature over at HartmannReport.com, which is basically a discussion thread where you can do a deep dive into a particular topic if you'd like. And you just click on our daily discussion threads at the top and you'll see it. And my question today, and I throw this out to you as well, Rand Paul is trying to start an anti-mask movement. He's even talking about lawsuits and how, not wearing a mask is a right and asking people to wear masks is tyranny and all this kind of stuff. You know, he's promoting his libertarian view of society, that we should be a me society instead of a we society. It's bizarre, it's twisted, it's narcissistic. It reflects Ayn Rand and the child murderer that she based the heroes of her novels on, Mr. Hickman. And sadly, it has a lot of followers. The question that I asked in our daily thread over there is, will he get traction on this? Do you know people who think that they're libertarians and they're followers of Rand Paul and his bizarre ideology that we should end Social Security, we should end Medicare, government shouldn't be involved in any kind of welfare programs or any kind of subsidies for anybody? and that the only purpose of government is to run the military and the police. I would say that's what he's describing, and what he's trying to get for America is literally the definition of a failed state. But anyhow, that's our thread for the day. After the break here, I want to get into Benedict, Arnold, and Donald Trump. But my main piece that I published today over at HartmannReport.com is titled "Don't Despair, You Can Be a Trim Tab and Help Save the World." And it's kind of based on Margaret Mead's famous saying, where she said that never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And I point out that this is something that people on the right are very familiar with. You know, Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book about this back in 2002. It was an international bestseller called The Tipping Point: How Small Changes Produce Big Results. And it's true. On the right, for example, you've got this one militia group called the Three Percenters. And they call themselves the Three Percenters because they believe that only 3% of Americans fought in the American Revolution. They're almost certainly wrong on their percentage. It looks like it was somewhere between 10 and 15%, which is a huge percentage, by the way. You know, it wouldn't surprise me if only 3% of Americans ever fought in Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan combined. We probably had a much larger percentage of Americans who fought in World War II, for example. But nonetheless, even though they're wrong about the number, this 3% number, in all probability, they are right that it was a very small percentage of Americans. John Adams and others pointed out that only about a third of Americans supported the American Revolution at the time it happened. And many fewer than that supported it prior to the Boston Tea Party, which was 1773. It was 3 years before the Declaration of Independence. It was the Tea Party that convinced many of the people who ultimately became the founders and framers that it was time to separate from England. You know, the year before the Tea Party, Thomas Jefferson had written a whole long tract that was widely published. You know, A Citizen's View of the Rights of British Americans was the title of it, about how we can be good British citizens here in the colonies. Thomas Jefferson, for God's sake. And you know, 3 years later, he's authoring the Declaration of Independence. What happened? Well, a little band of people in one town in Boston decided, no, we're not going to let the East India Company put all our little tea shops out of business. And they marched out there and they committed a $1 million act of vandalism. Now, I'm not advocating vandalism, but I am pointing out that small groups of committed people have always been what causes social change. People, the biggest problem I think that we're facing right now, particularly progressives and particularly in the Democratic Party, is this belief that you have to have a majority. You know, yeah, I could join the Democratic Party, but I'm just one person, you know, or yes, I could sign up for Indivisible or Our Revolution, or go over to progressivehub.net, by the way, which is a brand new site that Norman Solomon and Jeff Cohen have put up. You know, a couple guys who've been on our show many, many times over the years. And they're trying to make this an activism hub. Another great activism hub is over Daily Kos, dailykos.com. They're literally raising money and doing things. You don't even need to leave your house. You don't even, you know, I mean, it's just very simple, straightforward stuff you can do to become an activist. But people don't, because they think, oh, well, it doesn't work until you get half of Americans. No, not true. It wasn't half of Americans who got the Hyde Amendment passed back in the day. It was a fringe, an anti-abortion fringe. It wasn't half of Americans who got the Environmental Protection Agency into place back in the 70s. It was a small group of committed environmentalists, probably fewer than 5% of Americans, maybe fewer than 3%, who were actually active in that movement that Rachel Carson started. It was not, you know, 50% of Americans who were demanding seatbelts in cars back in the early 70s as a result of Ralph Nader's book, Unsafe at Any Speed. It was a small group of, again, it was probably fewer than 5% of Americans. And I just, you know, I hammer on this point in this article to try to encourage people. You know, join your local Democratic Party. Find a group, whether it's the, you know, the Sunrise Movement with you know, for young people with climate change, or whether it's Progressive Democrats of America for older people really fighting for, well, not just for older people. There's all kinds of people in PDA. But, you know, fighting for expansion of Medicare so that it covers all Americans, Medicare for all. There's There's a bunch of groups on that. Indivisible is doing great work across, kind of trans policy, all kinds of different issues. And they've got, activist guidebooks and every week there's a here's how you can get involved. These are essentially the trim tab folks. A trim tab is this little tiny piece of metal. It's about, well, it depends on the size of the airplane. And the little airplanes I used to fly, it was like a foot tall and about 3 inches wide. And it's on the tail rudder, the vertical part of the airplane. There are similar ones on the giant wings. They're called ailerons. And with just a little motion on that trim tab, it slightly alters the course of the airplane. You see the same thing if you drive a car and you've got a wheel that's out of alignment or a tire that's soft. You let go of the steering wheel and the car will drift off to one side of the road. It's like a trim tab. Individual citizens, you can become the trim tabs of society, the folks who actually alter the course of history. And I'm telling you, the right-wingers know this. They know it well. It's why the Koch network has invested in little policy think tanks in every single state in the United States. It's why ALEC twice a year gets together state legislators, state representatives, all Republicans, and big lobbyists and corporations. It's why ExxonMobil put $15 million into buying Facebook ads, and they and the American Petroleum Institute reached created more than 500 million impressions among Americans. Small actions, in that case, relatively speaking, small actions can produce very, very large results. Again, quoting Margaret Mead, indeed, that's the only way it has ever happened. So we need to stop waiting for the vast majority to catch up with us before we try to do something about climate change or racial justice or voting rights. We can do that right now. I mean, this is my whole, tag you're it. Seriously, tag you're it. It's time to get involved. Have you gotten involved? What have you seen as you got involved?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
When you look back, what movements do you think had the greatest consequence? Were you a part of any? I was part of SDS back in the day. We changed America. And welcome back. Stephanie in Bakersfield, California. Hey, Stephanie, thanks for listening to KPFK. What's up?
Hello, Tom. This is regarding the people who still don't want to wear masks and want to ban them.
Great.
I often ask those if they or anyone they know is coming up for surgery anytime soon. How about if we ensure that none of the surgical staff will wear a mask during their surgery?
Right.
How would they like that?
Right. Exactly. That's a great, question / analogy, metaphor, whatever you call it. And there has to be something that's even more. I mean, if you knew that somebody had an active case of tuberculosis, would you want them to wear a mask? For example.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, if you were sitting next to somebody on a bus and you knew that they had an active case of TB or, Ebola, it's like, where do we stop? Where do we draw the lines? I mean, as a society, we've largely drawn the line around the common cold and the flu. Although in Asia, with much higher population densities, cities like Hong Kong and Taipei and Tokyo, when people are sick with the common cold or a mask, they wear or the flu, they wear a mask. It's just like, it's socially acceptable. It's become the norm. So, I agree with you. Stephanie, thank you. That was a great one. Ernesto in Montgomery, Illinois. Hey, Ernesto, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I'm just calling. I just saw we left Afghanistan after 20 years.
Right.
And 2 weeks now, or however many weeks we've got left, the country's almost taken over.
Right, by the Taliban.
Yes. 20 years we were there.
Right.
billions, trillions of dollars.
And thousands of American lives, and probably 1 million Afghan lives.
Where is the outrage with that?
It's
Why
a
is
damn
there
good
such
question.
A war against the progressives.
And let's add to that, Ernesto, the phrase that the Taliban uses to describe themselves, and you'll find this in the American, just in mainstream press. The phrase that they use to describe themselves is freedom fighters. They see themselves like George Washington and his merry band, the people who are evicting the occupying force. That's how they saw themselves when the Russians were there. That's how they saw themselves when the French tried to come in. It's how they saw themselves when the Persians, back in the Persian Empire day, the Iranians tried to take over Iran. They have always seen themselves as freedom fighters, and they are not unique in that. That is true of every society on earth. No country wants to be occupied. And how George Bush and Dick Cheney were so stupid that they didn't realize that, particularly after George Bush spent a whole year AWOL from the Vietnam War trying to avoid going off and having combat, is beyond me. I don't get it.
Yep. It blows my mind.
Yeah. And instead, what conservatives are trying to do is redirect the outrage toward Joe Biden. You lost Afghanistan for us. I'm sorry, you can't lose a country you don't own.
Exactly.
It's amazing. Anyway, Ernesto, thank you. Thank you. That was a great punctuation mark to the day. We'll be right back. It's 21. A topic I hadn't mentioned, but it's certainly worth it. And I will again. We'll be right back right after this break. It's 21 minutes past the hour. Back in 1 minute. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So Rand Paul is now echoing Louis Gohmert. Remember Louis Gohmert back in the day, after 9/11, when he was talking about terror babies. There's Muslims coming to the United States to have babies who will be citizens, and we can't kick them out anymore, and then they're going to grow up and they're going to be terrorists. Yeah, and we all kind of laughed at Louis Gohmert. So now Rand Paul is talking about how the Biden administration is taking kids from down at the border who may have it, COVID, and they're plucking them up and putting them all over the United States as if they're wishing to seed the country with a new variant. Right. But that's not half of it. Then he goes on to say that, for him, quote, the bottom line for those who are saying I won't go to a restaurant unless everybody's vaccinated, he says, mind your own business. Well, Rand, it is our business. Public health is all of our businesses. I've got a whole new rant about Rand Paul's bizarre take on the public good over at thomhartmann.com. It's a video. You can check it out there. So I sort of teased what's going on with Donald Trump and frankly, I think that this really is worse than Watergate. This is even worse than Benedict Arnold. Benedict Arnold, who was a general in the American forces and ended up deserting to the British, might have influenced the outcome of one battle. Donald Trump tried to end American democracy. And he had Jeffrey Clark right next to him. Jeffrey Clark, who is now working with a right-wing think tank funded by the right-wing billionaires. There's always a cushy, large, high-pay, 6- or 7-figure job waiting if you try to destroy our country, waiting for you, funded by hardcore right-wingers who are billionaires. It's just like it's a law of nature now. And it's become really, really clear what's going on here. And frankly, I think that it's time for Congress and for the Justice Department to seriously consider and act on charging Donald Trump and Jeffrey Clark with seditious conspiracy, with conspiracy to commit sedition, to conspiracy to overthrow the government of the United States, plus interfering with an official act, of interfering with Congress, interfering with an election, trying to stage a coup. These are crimes. This isn't just bad acting. This isn't just Donald Trump's, lying about other politicians or lying about policies or lying about climate change or, lying about his tariffs. It's not any of that. We're talking actual crimes here. I also think that, Donald Trump is refusing to support masking in any way, and you've got Rand Paul out there just openly advocating it. There's a meme going around the Facebook. Oh, actually, it's Twitter. Forgive me. Triss, over at Triss Resists on Twitter. Why do people who choose not to get vaccinated go to the hospital when they get sick? It's literally filled with people they don't trust, which is really an interesting question. Oh, there's no COVID. I can't get COVID. I can fight it off with vitamin D and hydroxychloroquine and maybe this new horse deworming drug that they've got, ivermectin. All of these things are phony baloney solutions. There are drugs that you can get that will fight COVID once you have it, like the steroids and the monoclonal antibodies. But you've got to get yourself to a doctor. And you wouldn't need them if you just got vaccinated. But these people who are, Audra Lewis responses, agreed. I told my husband they should set up TED hospitals for the unvaxxed. And instead of doctors and nurses to treat them, they have people who did Google searches on how to care for them. Seems only fair since they trust a Google search more than professionals' medical training. Spot on. Meanwhile, Tucker Carlson went to Hungary to talk about how wonderful Hungary's, so-called democracy is. He interviewed Viktor Orban, and Hungarian media censored part of his interview. Honest to God. There's a story about it over at rawstory.com. Tucker Carlson mocked after claiming Hungary isn't repressive, then having his own interviews censored. It's amazing. Benedict Arnold was a piker. He had nothing on Donald Trump.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
So have you participated in any of these movements and seen change as a result? Are you enthusiastic and encouraged? I am.
Our book today is My Life in the Black Party. The title is Just Another N-Word, and it's by Field Marshal Don Cox, his life in the Black Panther Party. This is from Chapter 5, page 47. The chapter is titled, Use What You Got to Get What You Need. Before we entered into a direct relationship with the Panthers, our group had wanted to prove our worthiness by our actions. Since that was no longer in question, contact was made and a rendezvous fixed to meet at Huey's Pad on Telegraph Avenue in Oakland. I don't remember much about that first gathering, other than meeting David Hilliard, the Panther Party's chief of staff, for the first time. The only thing that stands out in my memory is a question from Huey as we were sipping coffee. He asked if I didn't think it better to be properly equipped before going into action. He suggested it was best to first rip off the necessary funds to get everything we needed in advance of launching a major effort. I had practically memorized his essay, The Correct Handling of a Revolution, in which he spoke of teaching by example. And so I blurted out the first thing that came to mind, which was, use what you got to get what you need. After a long, hot summer of 1967, with the rebellions in Newark, Detroit, and elsewhere, we felt that our preparations had, at least, put us on the same level as the rest of the country, and that the revolution would not pass us by. Our San Francisco group started attending and participating in any and all functions relevant to black people. And we tried to let everyone in our area, and we tried to get to know everyone in our area associated with the struggle. We also continued our community meetings. News of the death of Che Guevara in October of that year had us walking around in a stupor for a while, and although that came as a severe blow to the international struggle for freedom and justice of all people, we were proud to be among those who had responded to his battle cry and had picked up the fallen arms. Huey asked if we would conduct a meeting on Hunter's Point for him. He was supposed to go, but something had come up and he couldn't make it. We were honored that he thought enough of us to ask, and we were more than enthusiastic to do whatever he wanted. It was at that meeting that we had a new, surprising experience. we met our first resistance in the form of Adam Rogers. He was supposed to have been the biggest, baddest N-word on Hunter's Point, but when we encountered him, he came across like an Uncle Tom. He seemed to be impressed with our firearms demonstration, but he was violently against the idea of black people arming themselves for self-defense. He was convinced that would increase repression, even though history proved him wrong. When we examine the history of repression of black people, the only time there was significant decline in police violence and murders perpetrated against blacks was precisely the period when blacks were organized and had access to guns. Given the wave of terror and violence against blacks that continues to sweep the country, I truly believe there is a lesson to be learned from that fact. Rogers was one of the wounded in the Hunters Point Rebellion of the year before, and a photograph of him had been used by the news media to illustrate articles on the riots that broke out following the killing of a black teenager by police that September. Because of that, we were even more surprised by his reaction. It was not until later that we discovered that the administration of San Francisco Mayor Joseph Alito had sent in money after the rebellion and had bought off the so-called bad N-words. The same technique was used from coast to coast. Despite Rogers, most everyone seemed to like what we had to say and really related to the firearms demonstration. Several people wanted to take courses in handling weapons, and so I fixed a rendezvous for the following Saturday at the parking lot of the abandoned shopping center right on top of Hunters Point. The next day I arrived at the point at 7 in the morning in order to get set up before people began to gather. There wasn't going to be any target practice, but I would be firing a few shots in the air by way of demonstration. I knew that would pose no problem as far as the police were concerned. Due to their racism, whenever they heard shots on the point, they generally looked the other way. Once, during a dispute between two gangs, shooting broke out, and instead of police coming in to break it up, they sealed off the area and let them shoot it out. The gun battle lasted 24 hours, and the police didn't return until the next day. At around 8 o'clock, I saw David Hilliard's car driving up, which I found surprising because we had only seen each other a couple of times before. As the car approached, I recognized Emory Douglas and George Murray. Everyone had strange looks on their faces that made it clear that something was wrong. Damn. Huey had been shot and captured. He had shown up at David's wounded and bleeding heavily. There was real concern for his life, so David drove him to the hospital and left him on the steps, then drove straight to San Francisco to find me. He said Huey had asked him to ask me to help out in the aftermath, specifically dealing with the passenger who had been in Huey's car at the time of the shootout with Officer John Frey of the Oakland Police, who'd been killed. There was also the problem of the guns Huey had stockpiled. I'll never understand why David didn't just bring the guns with him, but he hadn't. And I was obliged to go back into the area, get everything, and get back out safely. That might sound easy, but the shootout had occurred less than 3 hours before, and there was one policeman dead and one seriously wounded, so it was hot over in Oakland, to say the least. There was no time to go by the house and unload the guns I had on hand for the training, so I followed David back to Oakland with a trunk full of weapons. David took me into the backyard of a house that had a lot of weeds and a stack of old lumber in which he had stashed the gun. In his state of excitement, he couldn't remember exactly where the pistol was, and while we were looking, an elderly black woman came out of the house next door and asked what we were doing. David kept searching and didn't look up. She then said, "If you don't come out of there, I'm going to call the police." I began to panic and told David to say something to the woman. When he rose up, she recognized him and calmed down. This was David's house, and she was his neighbor. On the one hand, I was relieved, but on the other, if the police were looking for the passenger who'd been with Huey, it was certain they wouldn't miss David's house, as both were known Panthers. Finally, he found the gun, and it continues from there. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So the Republican Party has sold themselves way back, all the way back to the 60s, really, as the serious party. We're the party of issues. We take stuff seriously. We have serious policy analysis. We have serious constitutional analysis. We are serious about the economy. We have all these think tanks, Heritage and Competitive Enterprise and Cato, and we've got the Federalist Society finding serious judges that we can put on the federal bench. And in response to 4 dead Americans, they got real serious. 5 House committees, 2 Senate committees. They created a separate House Select Committee for 4 dead Americans. That was Benghazi.
thousands of hours of testimony. The Secretary of State testifying for 8 hours straight. But when 5 people die at the Capitol, not so much. Got a new video about it over at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Let's see. One thing I wanted to mention, this new thread thing that we're trying out over at HartmannReport.com. It's brand new, and you have to be a HartmannReport.com subscriber in order to post. And the reason why we did that is to keep out the spammers and the trolls. So it's kind of a safe place, I guess, is our goal in creating this. So all that said. Let's pick up your phone calls and see what's on your mind. Gloria in Madison, Wisconsin. Hey, Gloria, what's up?
Oh, thank you, Tom. I just want to tell you, Mr. Hartmann, that you are my idol. I think you're great. I listen to you so much.
Well, thank you.
It's an honor to speak to you, and I'm a little nervous. But anyway, I wanted to tell you, you were just talking about smallness with small amount of people can make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we have an organization. I'm located in Wisconsin, and we have what they call Soul Saving Our Unique Land. It's a small group of people, and we want to save our land. We actually want to save our land instead of Wisconsin, and actually in the Midwest.
Mm-hmm.
And right now we are being taken over by a corporation. And that corporation is international, and it's outside of, it's in Canada, and it is doing great harm to our area in the Midwest. And how is that happening? And I want you to know right now that I'm a climate reality leader, and I've gone all over the United States to represent the fact that I want to make sure that we get rid of fossil fuels.
Yeah.
Because I myself,
Amen.
We have 44 solar panels. Okay, but what is happening is destruction of our health and our lands in the Midwest. We have soil that's 5 feet deep, does not have a rock in it, and they want to destroy that.
Yeah. It's
And
terrible.
it's called
Gloria, is there a
area.
website for the work you congratulations. Is there a website on being an activist? It is so important. Is there a website for the work that you're doing there in Madison?
Yes, it is. It's called nouplands.com.
How do you spell that?
No, N-O, and I think there's a dash there, and then uplands, UPLANDS.com.
Nouplands.com. Very cool.
Yeah, right now, we are getting 172 industrial wind turbines that are dinosaurs that they want to put in a small area that causes health, causes cancer, causes heart palpitations, causes respiratory problems, and they want to put them, and then these people in our area are having to leave because there's no way we can live in that area because it's a health issue.
Yeah.
And they put tons and tons and tons of concrete, tons and tons of concrete. So I'm for solar, putting it on your own roof, businesses putting it on their own roof, and not having to have to kill our land and kill our people.
I'm with you, Gloria. I need to get some more callers in here, but thank you. It's God bless you. I mean, it's just great. Teresa, or the gods bless you, whatever. Teresa in Bellevue, Washington. Hey, Teresa, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Boy, your listeners are an inspiration. That's so great.
I agree. To me too.
Yeah. Anyway, I wanted to talk about Rand Paul and just the libertarians in general. And they have so much hypocrisy. It's just kind of nauseating. But how they just want government, like you said, just to be police and military and get the government out of the way of everybody's lives. I thought about, how would they feel if we got rid of all patent protections? Because isn't that just a big, heavy-handed government interference in the free market?
It is. Patents used to be referred to as monopolies. When you read the writings of the people at the time of the writing of the Constitution, they always referred to them as government-granted monopolies, which is exactly what they are. So, yeah.
Yep. And, I mean, it's just another example where they like big government that benefits them and their cronies.
Yeah.
And they hate big government that, benefits the working people.
Yeah, yeah, very well said. Teresa, thank you. Thank you so much for that. Charles in Miami, Florida. Hey, Charles, what's up?
Hello.
Hey, Charles.
Hey, how you doing, Tom? Love your show as usual.
Yeah.
I would tell you definitely on, I think his name is Greg Clark, the guy with
No, it's Jeffrey
Trump,
Clark.
Jeffrey Clark. All right, I'm sorry. Jeffrey Clark.
Just like Jeffrey Rosen, his boss. That's why it's easy for me to remember.
Yeah. Oh, it's easy to remember that way. Yes, exactly. The thing is that I see is just one of two things. Either we put the pressure on our Attorney General, which, somebody has to tell me why he had to be Republican. Why do we have to have a Republican in any of our cabinets anymore to prove legitimacy?
Well, hang on just a second. It was a Republican, the Republican senator from Utah, Orrin Hatch, who recommended Merrick Garland to Barack Obama, but Garland was a Clinton appointee. He's never declared any kind of political affiliation. But Bill Clinton was the first guy who put Merrick Garland on the federal bench. So there's every reason to think that he's, cut out of the mold of kind of what you might call a moderate Democrat. Charles.
Right. Well, in my opinion, we don't need that anymore. We could have got any other, not independent, I'm sorry, liberal, progressive Democrat to do the same job. My thing is this: the system is already corrupt. So it's not a matter if that the Justice Department is going to try to do that, but do they have the will to do it? And I just think it's too much money sloshing around in the system, and we're on the outside looking in. And as far as Donald Trump, everything this man stands for is just like, why the hell isn't he in prison right now?
It's poison, yeah.
Why are we taking their word that all of these donations that's coming in to Donald Trump right now is above board and legal? Why isn't the Justice Department at this point looking into those donations right now? We know
they may well be, Charles.
We know the history that Democrats have said that he has. Okay,
right.
So right now we need to jump on them like white on rice,
yeah.
And we need to, we need to do some house cleaning, man. Because
I'm with you. And I get you're upset about Eric Holder. About Merrick Garland. I was just going to say I think that Eric Holder, bringing him back to run the Justice Department would have been a much better move for Biden. But he was he wanted to put his own stamp on it. And Merrick Garland was a guy who got badly dissed by the former guy, TFG, and he's trying to be the president guy. I get all that and totally support it. But anyway, thank you very much, Charles. Good to hear from you as always. Peggy in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Hey, Peggy, what's up?
Good morning. I want to tell you how important your show has been to me and how many people I have turned on to it. I think you do an incredible amount of research. But I want to thank you, but I'm not supposed to do small talk. So let me just launch right into
Thank you, Peggy.
My point. And you were talking earlier about how much difference one person could make. Mm-hmm. And here, actually north of Santa Fe, there's been a huge amount of Bureau of Land Management oil and gas leases with absolutely terrible environmental analyses. I've retired from that business, but I found they were going to be drilling 20 miles north of where I lived.
Wow.
And all I had to do is put up notices at the libraries, the one and only store, and the post offices. 40 people showed up for the meeting. This was 6 years ago. And we organized as a 501c, and we worked with a pro bono law firm called Western Environmental Law, and we have been successful in supporting 4 different lawsuits up to the district level of appeals, saying that they can't permit these leases that they've leased on public lands, strictly for oil and gas, where they did an inadequate environmental analysis, and we were able to get them to look at the other side of the Continental Divide, and basically they've quit drilling and permitting oil and gas leasing.
You beat the fossil fuel industry, and it started with one person putting posters up in a couple of places, and that one person was you, Peggy?
That was me, and
you're wonderful.
We started 501c3. We've got a board of directors of 6 people who've been here continuously, all with different specialties, and met with the BLM. We've got the community organized to write, at least 100 protest letters by giving workshops and putting examples up on our website. And
she just dropped off. It happens sometimes. Cell phones and all that kind of thing. Lucretia in Los Angeles. Hey, Lucretia, what's up?
Hey, greetings. Good morning, Tom.
Good morning.
I just want to also, chime in on your morning rant about it being a small majority.
Minority.
It's always been a small majority that have evoked change.
You mean a small minority?
One of my favorite go-to references is Harriet Tubman. She's widely celebrated today, but one of her famous statements is, I could have freed even more slaves if they only knew they were slaves. So the adversity that she faced within her own group, us, and how, just conviction alone. She wasn't military trained. She didn't have all of these prerequisites. She was just an everyday woman who saw that things were wrong.
And she changed the world
accordingly to it. And that's how it's all been. Even when it comes to debates, when I'm having my roundtable discussions, one of the things I point out is thank goodness for those small amount of people within our group that thought outside of the box, because they were viewed as troublemakers that were rocking the norm. But if it wasn't for them, we could have still very much been in chains. Yeah. So, no, it's never been a majority, ever.
Yeah, it's always started with a small group, Lucretia, and you are so right. And by the way, anybody who has not seen the movie about Harriet Tubman really needs to make an effort to go see that. But spot on, and you don't have to even rise to the level of being a Harriet Tubman. I mean, it's like Peggy was talking about. You can be a local activist in a way that most people don't even know about and still have huge impact. Lucretia, thank you so much. Thanks so much for that contribution.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's 48 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Paul in Zillah, Washington, listening on KBCS. Hey, Paul, what's up?
Good morning, Tom.
Hey, Paul.
First of all, I'd like to say how much I've enjoyed some of the people you've had on air lately.
Thank you.
And secondly, encouraging you, you mentioned that you were considering putting in solar panels. I'm calling to encourage you to do that.
Yeah.
Be a trim tab for green energy.
Oh, absolutely. It's on our list. It's just the challenge right now is finding a good contractor and a reasonable price. It's the stuff we've been getting is just all over the map.
Yeah, we put them in 12 years ago, even though it didn't look like it was cost effective, because we felt it was an important thing to do. And ours are now just getting paid for, and we have long ago replaced the carbon involved in production. And at the moment, we're sending electrons in the grid. We're with Pacific Power, the same company I believe you're with, and 50% of their electricity is generated by coal-powered plants.
Yeah, no,
So
we get our power from a company called PGE, which is not Pacific Gas and Electric. It's Portland Gas and Electric, I think.
Yeah.
Portland,
well, I know
General
that Pacific Power does a lot of Portland, too. So.
Yeah.
So anyway, you're one of those people who has a large following. You put in solar panels. That's going to encourage somebody else. So
yeah,
go for it, Tom.
Okay. Thank you, Paul. Good to hear from you, and thanks for the words of encouragement. Mike in Lomita, California. Hey, Mike. Thanks for listening to KPFK. What's up?
Hey, Tom. I apologize for not calling in Friday, but that was just after they awarded the gold medal in Congress. But I want to say a few words in praise of the police, both the Capitol Police and the D.C. Police. Millions of us across this country have taken an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies. Those guys on January 6th literally did it, put their lives on the line.
Yes.
And
against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
Yes, against a very large domestic enemy. And I just want to recognize them and praise them, along with General Milley and others, former defense secretaries, and all who were doing what they could to fend off the attempted coup by Mr. Individual One. Mm-hmm. And that was basically the content of my call.
Yeah. I think it's a really important for us to recognize that these police from these two departments, the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police, which Officer Fanone was a member of. In fact, he was an undercover narcotics officer. You know, I mean, you know, that's how wide they were reaching to bring people in. And the D.C. Capitol Police, whose job is specifically to defend the Capitol. I don't recall any other time in my lifetime, and maybe I'm wrong on this, when police departments were the sole barrier against a group of people who were trying to destroy America. I mean, you know, it wasn't the police who stopped 9/11. 9/11 didn't get stopped. I mean, you know, it happened. There were probably police agencies that stopped other attacks. But I just don't recall any other time that we've had that direct a threat that was taken on by police. Do you?
No, this has been a unique experience. 240-odd years of constitutional government, and then we get a chief executive who has contempt for anything involving any limitation on his abilities.
Yeah, not just contempt, also complete ignorance of our form of government. I mean, you know, Donald Trump came in thinking he was king now, and is still trying to behave like it. Mike, thank you. Thank you. So well said. It's 52 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with you in 1 minute. Just please stick around. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So over at ThomHartmann.com, we just put up a new video for our supporters, the people who support our program, that talks about Malcolm X saying, if you're not careful, the newspapers will have you hating the people who are oppressed and loving the people who are the oppressors. He said that 55 years ago to, you know, this month, February, in 1965. And, you know, what that actually means, how that warning from Malcolm X was apparently taken to heart by the Republican Party in 1981 through the Reagan presidency. And we actually saw this shift in America to the point where, you know, that led to everything. Stop and frisk and the demonization of homeless people and the demonization of poor people and black people and Muslim people and all of this stuff came out of this very specific kind of Lee Atwater strategy in the 1980s. So you can find it over at ThomHartmann.com and check it out. And welcome back. Sometimes my mouse doesn't work quite the way I'd like. Barbara in Chicago Heights, Illinois. Hey, Barbara, what's on your mind?
Good. This is afternoon. Good morning, Tom.
Hey, Barbara.
I was wondering, have you read the article by Tom Rogers he's the editor-at-large for Newsweek. He said, CEOs, put your employees where your mouths are.
No, I haven't read it.
Okay, I'm trying to be succinct. It's about moving, because people can work from home, so it's about moving the employees to what do they call it? Swing states, like Florida, Texas, North Carolina, but they work from home. And so, but basically moving them so that they are voters in those swing states.
Trying to get more Democrats into red states. I love it.
Trying to get more Democrats in those states. Yes.
Yeah. It's, you know, what's happening is that the Republican Party, since it's become kind of the Trump party, it's actually shrinking. The number of people who are registered as Republicans in most states is declining. People are re-registering, mostly as independents, occasionally as Democrats. And there just isn't the enthusiasm outside of the white supremacists. I don't see anybody who is enthusiastic about the Republican Party anymore. And I'm very concerned about the 2022 elections, just because the Supreme Court lets all this big money flood in, and we can see, you know, we've seen over and over and over again what big money can do in an election, even in Democratic primaries, like we saw in Ohio recently. But that aside, I'm broadly optimistic, because I think that Americans are waking up. I think that increasingly these QAnon crazies, the anti-maskers, the anti-vaxxers, the whole bunch of them, they're becoming marginalized. They're you know, and people aren't taking them seriously any longer, Barbara.
Okay, so when you have some time, why don't you read the article?
Okay, that you said that was in, tell me again, it was in Newsweek, and it was...
It's in Newsweek. It's CEOs, put your employees where your mouths are.
Yeah. Interesting. I wonder, there is this debate going on about whether we should still be working from home, or whether it's more important to get back into the office. It really depends on the company, you know, to a large extent. But I suspect that commercial property is never going to be the same. I suspect the workplace is never going to be the same, at least not for a generation. Yeah, I mean, the building that we're in, I look around, it's half empty now. You know, companies have literally left. They're just gone. And I know that several of them didn't go out of business. They just, you know, the company that did our app was in our building, and they're still there, but they're all just working from home. And they just said, you know, yeah, we're not going to renew the lease. So I get it. There you go. Barbara, thank you. Thank you for the call. Fascinating. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, our book is by Frantz Fanon, and it's The Wretched of the Earth. This is from the chapter on national culture on page 145. It sort of reads like Thomas Paine, actually. Each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it in relative opacity. In the underdeveloped countries, preceding generations have simultaneously resisted the insidious agenda of colonialism and paved the way for the emergence of the current struggles. Now that we are in the heat of combat, we must shed the habit of decrying the efforts of our forefathers or feigning incomprehension at their silence or passiveness. They fought as best they could with the weapons they possessed at the time, and if their struggle did not reverberate throughout the international arena, the reason should be attributed not so much to a lack of heroism, but to a fundamentally different international situation. More than one colonized subject had to say, "We've had enough." More than one tribe had to rebel. More than one peasant revolt had to be quelled. More than one demonstration had to be repressed for us to stand firm, certain of our victory. For those of us who are determined to break the back of colonialism, our historic mission is to authorize every revolt, every desperate act, and every attack aborted or drowned in blood. In this chapter, we'll analyze the fundamental issue of the legitimate claim to a nation. The political party that mobilizes the people, however, is little concerned with this issue of legitimacy. Political parties are concerned solely with daily reality, and it is in the name of this reality, in the name of this immediacy which influences the present and future of men and women, that they make their call to action. The political party may very well speak of the nation in emotional terms, but it is primarily interested in getting the people who are listening to understand that they must join in the struggle if they quite simply want to exist. We now know that in the first phase of the national struggle, colonialism attempts to diffuse nationalist demands by manipulating economic doctrine. At the first sign of a dispute, colonialism feigns comprehension by acknowledging with ostentatious humility that the territory is suffering from serious underdevelopment that requires major social and economic reforms. And it is true that certain spectacular measures, such as the opening of work sites for the unemployed here and there, delay the formation of a national consciousness by a few years. But sooner or later, colonialism realizes it is incapable of achieving a program of socioeconomic reforms that would satisfy the aspirations of the colonized masses. Even when it comes to filling their bellies, colonialism proves to be inherently powerless. The colonial state very quickly discovers that any attempt to disarm the national parties at a purely economic level would be tantamount to practicing in the colonies what it did not want to do in its own territory. And it is no coincidence that today the doctrine of Cartierism is on the rise just about everywhere. Cartier's bitter disillusionment with France's stubborn determination to retain ties with people it will have to feed, whereas so many French citizens are in dire straits, reflects colonialism's inability to transform itself into a nonpartisan aid program. Hence, once again, no need to waste time repeating, better to go hungry with dignity than to eat one's fill in slavery. On the contrary, we must persuade ourselves that colonialism is incapable of procuring for colonized people the material conditions likely to make them forget their quest for dignity. Once colonialism is understood where its social reform tactics would lead it, back come the old reflexes of adding police reinforcements, dispatching troops, and establishing a regime of terror better suited to its interests and its psychology. Within the political parties, or rather parallel to them, we find the cultured class of colonized intellectuals. The recognition of a national culture and its right to exist represent their favorite stomping ground. Whereas the politicians integrate their action in the present, the intellectuals place themselves in the context of history. Faced with the colonized intellectuals' debunking of the colonist theory of a pre-colonial barbarism, colonialism's response is mute. It is especially mute since the ideas put forward by the young colonized intelligentsia are widely accepted by metropolitan specialists. It is in fact now commonly recognized that for several decades, numerous European researchers have widely rehabilitated African, Mexican, and Peruvian civilizations. Some have been surprised by the passion invested by the colonized intellectuals in their defense of a national culture. But those who consider this passion exaggerated are strangely apt to forget that their psyches and their egos are conveniently safeguarded by the French or German culture, whose worth has been proven and which has gone unchallenged. I concede the fact that the actual existence of an Aztec civilization has done little to change the diet of today's Mexican peasant. I concede that whatever proof there is of a once highly Songhai, of the once mighty Songhai civilization, does not change the fact that the Songhais today are undernourished, illiterate, abandoned to the skies and water, with a blank mind and glazed eyes. But as we have said on several occasions, this passionate quest for a national culture prior to the colonial era can be justified by the colonized intellectuals' shared interest in stepping back and taking a hard look at the Western culture in which they risk becoming ensnared. Fully aware that they're in the process of losing themselves and consequently of being lost to their people, these men work away with raging heart and furious mind to renew contact with their people's oldest inner essence, the furthest removed from colonial times. Let us delve deeper. Perhaps this passion and this rage are nurtured, or at least guided, by the secret hope of discovering, beyond the pleasant wretchedness, beyond the self-hatred, something that redeems us.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I got kind of discovered this, it went down this rabbit hole here with a piece by Jordan Green over at Raw Story. Good way to die, an AR-15 worshiping Moonies sect mobilizing for January 6th, or mobilized for January 6th, and is recruiting the far right to its apocalyptic vision. It goes back to a guy who's just a real expert on all this stuff, licensed medical health professional, a cult expert. He's the author of a couple of books, Combating Mind Control and most recently, The Cult of Trump, and is the founding director of the Mind Resource Center. freedomofmind.com is the website. And, you know, just to nail it, his Twitter handle is @cultexpert. Dr. Stephen Hassan. Or Hassan, excuse me. Dr. Hassan, welcome back to the program. It's been a while since we've talked. Tell me about this cult of AR-15 worshiping Moonies.
So briefly, Tom, and thanks for having me on again. It was a pleasure to do it when the book first came out. I was in the Moon cult from 74 to 76, and I was trained to die on command or kill on command. Moon said that democracy was satanic, that we would have to infiltrate the government. We would need to, destroy the separation of church and state. And essentially, this cult called the Rod of Iron Ministries is run by one of Moon's sons, Sean Moon, and he wears a crown of golden bullets and claims that a verse from Revelation of the New Testament says you need AR-15s to do God's will. And he's bought a compound to do training for civil war. So, and there was an incredible thread on Twitter today, Tom, by Capitol Hunters, following up from the Raw Story, where they went through all their footage of January 6th and documented this group as an armed, like the Oath Keepers. So it's a fascinating bit of research that they've done. So shout out to them.
Yeah, have these, absolutely. Stephen, have these, first of all, do they call themselves Moonies? I know when Reverend Moon died, there was sort of a power struggle over who got to claim, his followers and his name among his children.
Yeah, to be clear, when I was in the cult, that's when the term Moonies was used by the media, and Moon loved it. In fact, I wore a T-shirt, I am a Moonie, I heart a Moonie, and I love it. But after he was convicted of a felony and sent to jail, they did a PR spin and said, calling Moonies is like calling black people the N-word, so don't call us Moonies. But I continue to call them Moonies because that's what Moon loved, and he was the Messiah. Right. So anyway, so the mother of Sean and Justin have split. They were fighting over the billions of dollars and separated. And interestingly, she, right after Biden was elected, had a global virtual peace meeting, had Pence speak, Pompeo, Gingrich, and a bunch of other people. So they're both trying to influence the planets, but Sean Moon wants to be king. He feels like he's the one taking over Sun Myung Moon's role, whereas she says, nope, Sun Myung Moon's in the spirit world and he's working with me. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, it is. But it sounds like if she got the acting, the Secretary of State of the United States, Mike Pompeo, and, the former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, to come speak at her gig, she's got some considerable pull. Are they still? I know the Moonies were having a huge influence on the Republican Party back in the 90s, and a lot of it was underground because they were funding Republican politicians and events and things like that.
Exactly. In fact, Tom, this weekend I learned for the first time in 45 years. I've been out of the cult for 45 years, doing my work as a mental health professional, helping people get out of cults. I learned that the Council for National Policy, and I'll shout out to Ann Nelson's book, Shadow Network, this is the group that put James Whalen, the founding editor of Moon's newspaper, the Washington Times, in place. So the connection between this shadow network of right-wing operatives and the Moonies has now been completely exposed directly.
So
aside from the fact that we knew Gary Jarman had been a Moonie and was involved at the founding.
Right. So we have now a religious sect, the Rod of Iron Ministries, run by Sean Moon, the son of Sun Myung Moon, or however you say, the Reverend Moon.
That was pretty good, Sun Myung Moon.
Thank
correct.
you. So we've got his son running this Rod of Iron Ministries cult, and they believe that democracy is satanic and must be replaced by theocracy, by making Sean king of America. Do I have that right so far?
Correct. In fact, there's a constitution on his website that talks about the constitution they want to put in place of our Constitution, the real Constitution.
So to what extent were, and you mentioned, this threat of, finding Moonies on January 6th. Well, you could find people who ate at Dairy Queen the day before on January. I mean, pick any random thing you want to find, and probably it was represented by somebody on January 6th. But was it just that a few of these Moonies showed up, or were they integrated into or collaborating or co-conspiring with, some of the other militia groups or even some of the Republican politicians? I mean, how big was this presence on January 6th of this anti-democracy cult?
So the truth is that on January 6th, and I knew there was going to be a violent attempt from all of the social media that we were tracking, I got an image of a tweet from Sean Moon from my colleague in Japan, who's a Moonie watcher, and that was and I shared that on social media. But it was really the Raw Story piece by Jordan Green that brought the Capitol hunters to really dig in and say, no, they were there the day before planning. They had the military gear. Steve Bannon spoke for them several times. And the other news story was this compound near Waco where David Koresh went up in flames that they purchased to train people how to use weapons and use knives to kill people for civil war. And this is a real thing. This is not hyperbole or
yeah, and let's keep in mind, at the time that Osama bin Laden attacked America, he had fewer than 5,000 followers in Afghanistan. He had run 20,000 people through his so-called terrorist training camp, but the majority of them, were not there for the ideology, and they were not committed to bin Laden. They just, were there for the training for whatever it may be. But he had about 5,000. I mean, in fact, this is the essence of my rant at the opening of the show, is that it is never mass movements that change policy or change countries. Eventually, it gets to that point. But it's always a small band of committed people, as Margaret Mead said. Indeed, that's the only way it's ever happened. Does Sean Moon and his Rod of Iron Ministries, this anti-democracy cult, do they have like 50 followers, 500 followers, 5,000 followers, 500,000?
I think it's pretty darn small. I'd say it's 3,000 maybe.
Well, that's on the order of what Bin Laden
They're very
had.
much recruiting vets. They're recruiting NRA folks to the gun theme. I don't know how many people actually believe he's a religious figure, the Messiah on earth.
Mm-hmm. Does he have platforms? Is he like renting radio stations like some of the other right-wing cult leaders, like Jerry Falwell used to do, and Kenneth Copeland is doing now, preaching end of the world crazy stuff and don't get masked and don't get vaccines and things like that. So, does he have radio and television, or is he using Facebook? I mean, what platforms is he using to get his message out?
I'm going to be honest with you. This has not been the focus of my attention. The cult of Trump has been, as well as helping clients with QAnon and other types of matters, but it's now back at the fore, and I'm trying to connect my colleagues and ex-members. I did a blog and an interview with a former 36-year member, Ed Kaufman, who left the group about 7 years ago and has been doing some deep research. So the answer is, have me back on again, and I'll have a more in-depth answer.
Okay, let me flip that around for you, Dr. Hassan. When you have that information, reach out to Sean, and we will definitely have you back on again. This is serious stuff, and we need to be paying attention to it. AR-15 worshiping Moonies mobilized for January 6th. A Good Way to Die was the title of the article over on Raw Story. You can easily find it, with a good search engine. As well as Dr. Hassan's website, freedomofmind.com, or his Twitter handle, Cult Expert. You can follow them all. Stephen, thank you again for dropping by today. It's great talking with you.
Thank you, Tom, so much.
Yep. Keep up the good work. Keep up the great work, the essential work.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's coming up on 17 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with your calls in just a moment, and more of the news of the day, by the way. And welcome back. Let's see here. Lynn in El Segundo, California. Hey, Lynn. Thanks for listening
Hi.
to KPFK. What's up?
Hi. I love your show, like everyone, and
No need to even say it, Lynn. It's okay.
I know, and the listeners are great. I feel like we're a little family. But anyway, I came in late, and I heard the caller, I think it was from New Mexico, who said she started a movement and it made a big difference. And that's what reminded me of a woman named Katie Fahey. She's an independent voter from Michigan, and she was very concerned in 2016 about the political polarization in the election season back then. So she put a post on Facebook, I would like to take on gerrymandering in Michigan, because she thought it would appeal to people regardless of their party. If you're interested, let me know. And a dozen people called back. Then she got 70 people to attend her first town meeting, and then they had 33 meetings. They got just a small number of volunteers that made a big difference, because they actually got a proposition on the ballot called the Independent Redistricting Commission. And there's more to the story if everybody wants to read about how inspirational this particular action was. It's Katie, K-A-T-E-Y, Fahey, F-A-H-E-Y, and she's now, there was a documentary movie made about it, and it's called Slay the Dragon.
Mm-hmm.
And
Katie has been on this program, actually, Lynn. It was a year or two ago, wasn't it, Sean? Yeah, in that neighborhood. It's been a while. But and I think it was probably around the time the movie came out. And but you're absolutely right. I mean, she is just an example, as was the earlier caller. And a lot of people look at that and they say, well, I don't have the force of personality or the enthusiasm to be that front person, to be the one who makes it happen. But there's a lot of us introverts out there who, and I know how to pretend to be an extrovert, but in my private life, I just, Louise and I are both really introverted. And, so there's a lot of people who don't want to be like at the front of the movement, but they would like to support the movement. And that's what's necessary to make movements, is people who say, people who said to Katie, yes, I'll join you. And then you have this little group of 10, 15, 20 people, 30 people, and then it becomes 100 people. And it's still not half of Michigan, but it's changing public policy, and that's so important.
Right. It's the snowball effect. Just get it started, and the momentum, builds, and it can make big differences.
Well, let me amplify your metaphor. It's also the butterfly effect. This thing that I think it was Stuart Pym, proposed back in the day, the ecological biologist who's been on this program also. That literally a small disturbance, like a butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil or in Northwest Africa, can cause, a small change in the weather there that leads to a much larger change, that leads to a low pressure system, that leads to a hurricane that takes out New Orleans.
That's right. That's right. And you know what? I just thought of another example in Florida. Desmond Meade, the man who's the returning voter from being a felon, who started that movement for Proposition 4 and ended up getting. There's just such a great story there. But he ended up getting that passed by more than 60% of the vote. So
that's right.
We can make a difference.
We can make a difference.
There, tag you're it.
There you go. Lynn, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And Lynn is so right. You can make a difference. It's just, it could be as simple as just joining a website or making a couple of phone calls. You can make a difference. We'll be right back. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. So we have over at HartmannReport.com my daily rant, which you can find there. And over at ThomHartmann.com, we have the free newsletter, which lists every single website, gives you hot links right out to every single website for every single story that I talk about throughout the program during the course of the day. And then, of course, also at ThomHartmann.com, we've got our weekly video that we put up. And the one this week is kind of mind-boggling. It turns out, if you remember back when Anthony Kennedy resigned from the U.S. Supreme Court right after Trump made remarks about his son Justin, who had signed off on $1 billion worth of loans from Deutsche Bank to Donald Trump, Kennedy resigned, and Brett Kavanaugh was nominated by Trump. And Christine Blasey Ford said he was, essentially guilty of sexual assault. All kinds of tips went to the FBI, and we have just found out what happened to those tips. It's all over at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Is the code red for humanity going to take, the IPC, is it going to take hold? Is it going to work? Again, another call to activism here. We have this climate crisis. We have, day after tomorrow, right here in Portland, Oregon, we're going to see the result of the jet stream. That's that giant river of air in the upper atmosphere that is starting to collapse. It's starting to, I think it was Dr. Mann on this program described it as being drunken because the Arctic ice is no longer frozen. And so the jet stream is, which used to push, it used to be this current, this river of air that circled around just south of the Arctic, and it would move weather systems across the northern hemisphere. So you'd get rain one day, sun the next day, then rain the next day, and the weather was constantly changing. The old saying, hey, if you don't like the weather, just wait, right? Everywhere I've lived, I grew up in Michigan, and people would say, well, this is Michigan, if you don't like the weather, just wait till tomorrow. And then we moved to New Hampshire, and it was like, hey, if you don't like the weather, just wait till tomorrow. And then we moved to Georgia, and people said the same thing. We moved to Vermont, and people said the same. We moved to Oregon, they said, when I lived in Germany, they said the same thing. But here's the deal. The reason weather changes is because the jet stream used to flow like really rigorously and strong and continuously, and now it's failing. It's drooling all the way down to well, I don't know how far south this one's going to go, probably Central California. And it's creating these heat domes. We're going to get 103 degrees on Wednesday here in Portland again. And I mean, this is insanely destructive stuff. That's the jet stream. Now there's signs that the Gulf Stream, that's the river of water, is on the verge of collapsing. And now the IPCC has come out and said, we need urgent action. This report was just released today. We're going to do a deep dive on it on Wednesday with Dr. Michael Mann. But it shows the temperatures are rising more rapidly than they had expected, than their other climate models had pointed out. They're asking both public and private actors, both governments and corporations and individuals, to get on board, to act now to get us to net zero carbon. This is the strongest language that has yet shown up in one of these IPCC reports. These are 195 governments around the world, and this is serious stuff. The loss of sea ice is causing, the Arctic sea ice, a real crisis. We've got large-scale die-offs of coral reefs. The methane-rich permafrost, we had Jason Box on about this the week before last, is not only increasing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, but methane as well. Lila Connors, George and Leo DiCaprio, and Roe Sharon Peled. I'm sorry, I'm mispronouncing Roe's last name. In any case, we put together a movie, Ice on Fire, about this very topic. You know, the ice on fire being methane, and now, which is 80 times more potent than carbon dioxide, and it's starting to mobilize from the Arctic tundra across Siberia and northern Canada. When we started burning fossil fuels, when humans started pumping this carbon dioxide into our atmosphere, we were at 280 parts per million. Bill McKibben started 350.org back in the day when we were around 300 parts per million, begging us to stop at 350. We are now at 415 parts per million. And we could go as high as 800 parts per million by 2060 if we don't change course now. So the Senate Democrats just unveiled today their $3.5 trillion, this is the one that's going to take reconciliation to pass, $3.5 trillion plan to combat climate change and to rescue America's families in the process. And I will share some details of that with you on the other side of this break. But do you think this is gonna fly? Do you think Republicans will succeed in blocking it? Do you think that the corporate Democrats in Congress are? We'll see. I mean, this is, again, one of those things where our activism is going to make a difference. I'll give you some details on the other side of this break and then pick up your phone calls.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Just a couple minutes down the road on the other side of this break, I'll be picking up your phone calls. We'll be right back.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Under the Influence, Putting Peer Pressure to Work by Robert H. Frank. And I'm reading from the prologue. That we are more closely connected to one another than most of us realize is an old idea. An important variation dates from 1929, when Hungarian writer Frigyes Karinthy published a short story entitled Chains. Two of the story's main characters speculate that any two living people can be connected by a chain involving no more than 5 acquaintances. That some such chains exist is hardly surprising, since most of us can think of people in distant locations to whom we're connected through a small number of intermediaries. The man bites dog aspect of Karinthy's conjecture is that almost any two people, A and E, could be linked by a chain like A knows B, B knows C, C knows D, who knows E. One of the first systematic attempts to test this claim came in the 1960s with a series of experiments by the psychologist Stanley Milgram. In it, he sent packages containing a small booklet to 96 people chosen at random from the Omaha, Nebraska telephone directory. His cover letter asked them to try to forward the booklet to a specific residence of Boston, Massachusetts, through a chain of personal acquaintances. He told them the name and address of the Boston resident, that he worked as a stockbroker, and that the first person in their chain should be somebody they knew on a first-name basis. Milgram also advised them to choose someone they believed, presumably based on the target's location and occupation, could be socially closer to the target than they were themselves. Subsequent recipients in the chain were asked to forward the same instructions. Many of the Omaha recipients undoubtedly tossed Milgram's booklet in the trash, so it's remarkable that the Boston target received 18 of the 96 packages. The average number of links in the 18 chains was 5.9. But the now familiar expression 6 degrees of separation would not gain broad currency until many years later when John Guare's play by that name premiered on Broadway in 1990. The concept became a meme in full when 4 Albright College students introduced 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon in 1994, a game designed to measure the professional proximity of an actor, living or dead, to the American film star Kevin Bacon. An actor has a Bacon number of 1, for example, if he or she appeared in the same film with Bacon. Someone who appeared in a film with another actor who appeared in a film with Bacon has a Bacon number of 2, and so on. The average Bacon number is 2.95 among actors who have one. In that group, even the actor most distant from Bacon, William Rufus Shafter, has a Bacon number of only 7. Shafter, a Union Army officer during the Civil War, appeared in 2 films in 1898. For academics who study social connectedness, the 6 degrees concept gained little traction until 1998. That's when the sociologist Duncan Watts and the mathematician Steve Straga published their landmark paper, Collective Dynamics of Small World Networks in Nature. In the years since then, this paper has provided the mathematical foundation for the analytical tools that social scientists have been using with such remarkable success to study how ideas and behaviors spread through populations like infectious diseases. It has already been cited by other scholars more than 38,000 times and is one of the few papers ever published to be among the most widely cited works in multiple disciplines. In his 1976 book, The Selfish Gene, the evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins coined the term meme, which Webster now defines as an idea, behavior, style, or usage that spreads from person to person within a culture. The meme is to cultural transmission, Dawkins argued, as the gene is to biological transmission. One of Charles Darwin's central insights was that natural selection favors genetic variations that enhance the individual organism's ability to survive and reproduce. Much of the time, the same variations also benefit larger groups, but often not. For example, an inclination to cheat when no one's looking might benefit individuals, but widespread cheating almost always makes matters worse for groups. It is the same with memes. The memes that propagate most successfully are often ones that benefit both individuals and groups. But here too, not always. As the legal scholar Jeffrey Stake has argued, ideas should not be treated as inert products, but as living things that sometimes exert some influence over their environment. Some of the ideas are more adept at surviving than others, and the ones that survive will not necessarily be good for humans. It is often hard to evaluate whether a specific behavior even qualifies as a meme, and if so, whether its consequences on balance are positive or negative. Yet sometimes the evidence is clear. We know, for example, that the strongest predictor of whether people will take up smoking is the proportion of their close friends who smoke. Smoking is thus clearly a meme. The negative health consequences of smoking are also conclusively documented, and most smokers themselves express regret over having started. By definition, then, smoking unambiguously qualifies as a socially destructive meme. On the other side of the ledger, we have compelling evidence that the adoption of photovoltaic solar panels is both socially contagious and almost uniformly positive in terms of environmental consequences. Accordingly, few would object to calling the practice a socially beneficial meme. Adam Smith, widely considered the father of economics, is often cited in defense of the claim that competitive markets produce the greatest good for the greatest number. The book is Under the Influence by Robert H. Frank.
Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Just a reminder that my daily rants are published every day over at hartmanreport.com. And our podcast, our 1-hour podcast of the show, which is entirely free, is available through, iTunes and all the normal places where you find podcasts, cut down of our show. And that we post a weekly video over at thomhartmann.com. And the one this week is about seditious conspiracy, U.S. Code 2384. And the argument I'm making is that this law, which imposes 20 years in prison to, by force, prevent, hinder, or delay the execution of any law of the United States, end quote, is something that we should be seriously considering dusting off and applying to not just the people who showed up on January 6th, but the people who sent them there. Check it out, thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So I told you the Senate Democrats, in fact, actually, I just got an email 12 minutes ago from Leah Greenberg, who is the co-executive director of Indivisible. It didn't just come to me. It went out to everybody who's on the indivisible.org website, who's signed up for their mailing list. And she's pointing out that Mitch McConnell is going to allow this $1 billion infrastructure bill that's just basically roads and bridges. There's they throw a few bones to a few other things like broadband, but basically it's roads and bridges, fix the potholes, which is all good stuff. We haven't been doing that since Reagan's austerity program kicked in 1981, and it's high time. But it's really a drop in the bucket, and it's not addressing climate change, which is why there's some Republicans who may go along with it. So McConnell is saying, basically, to the Republicans, let's pass this small bill so that we can give cover to Manchin and Sinema when they say that they will not go along with the large bill. The problem that the Senate and Manchin, Sinema, and Mitch McConnell specifically, and the fossil fuel billionaires who are funding all three of them, the problem that they're confronting is that the Progressive Caucus in the House has said, we're not going to vote on that $1 billion bill unless it's paired with our $3.5 billion bill being successfully passed through reconciliation. And it's going to require us contacting our members of Congress, particularly your senators and your members of the House of Representatives as well, telling them, the House members, particularly if you're represented by a progressive one, stand strong, telling your senators, we want both bills. And just today, the Senate Democrats put forward their budget resolution for this. Now, again, this isn't the final piece of legislation. That is still being drafted. But this is the resolution that can be voted on to determine whether this package, it kind of defines what the pieces are going to be and how big each one of those pieces is going to be. And then they get into the devil in the details part of it. But it includes 4 buckets of programs. There's a great summary of this, by the way, over at Daily Kos by Joan McCarter. It's titled Senate Democrats Unveil $3.5 trillion Plan for Families, Health Care, and Green Jobs and Investment. 4 buckets. Families is 1 bucket. Climate is the 2nd. Infrastructure and jobs is the 3rd. And health care is the 4th. In the family bucket, it creates pre-kindergarten for 3- and 4-year-olds, 2 years of free community college, extends the tax breaks for children of low-income workers, and establishes paid family and sick leave. There's also a kind of a DACA kind of thing that gives legal status to millions of undocumented immigrants. The climate bucket, quote, puts the U.S. on track to meet President Biden's 80% electricity and 50% economy-wide carbon reductions with new clean energy programs and tax incentives, new polluters fees, coastal resilience programs, investments in combating drought and wildfire, and incentives for residential weatherization and green electrification. And I am so hoping that passes because I want to put solar on my house, and it would be nice to have a little help, right? This is all the stuff, by the way, that got cut out of the bipartisan bill. There's also, in the climate area, green and sustainable public housing, housing affordability, green home construction, a civilian climate corps modeled on the New Deal's Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC, the largest ever one-time investment in Native American infrastructure projects, and strengthening the supply chain. In the healthcare bucket, it expands Medicare to include dental, vision, and hearing, and expands the American Rescue Program for home and community-based care services for seniors and disabled people, provides coverage for people who fall into the Medicaid gap. And at its core, Senator Chuck Schumer said, this is about restoring the middle class in the 21st century and giving more Americans the opportunity to be there, and greening our climate. So big stuff, big work, and a lot that we've got to do. Bill in Tucson, Arizona. Hey, Bill, thanks for listening to us on Sirius XM. What's on your mind today?
Hey, good morning. I want to talk about climate change. I've been a member of a group called the Citizens Climate Lobby since 2018, and it's a group that I've never heard you talk about, and I would recommend looking at it. They have been advocating for a bill that's been in Congress a couple of times. This time it's H.R. 2307. It's called the Carbon Innovation and Dividend Act. And what this does is it prices carbon starting at $15 a ton at the site of production or at the border, and then 98% of that money is provided as a monthly dividend to citizens. So the economics of this is people at the lower end of the economic spectrum end up making money because they have a smaller carbon footprint. It reduces greenhouse gases about 33% within 5 years. It creates jobs, but it's not something that I hear anybody talking about.
Yeah, and this is what Republicans refer to as a market-based solution, and this should be transpartisan.
And this is a nonpartisan group. What's interesting is the Senate has not been very interested in this, but this year there are, I think, 4, but there I know 3 bills. Durbin submitted one, S685. There's another one that's Senate 2184 that are modifications of the H.R. 2307 bill. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I think that ought to be done when we're talking to folks about this is in 2019, the Defense Department published a report about the national security threat of climate change. They list 79 military facilities in the United States that are threatened by climate change. Now, there cannot be a Republican that doesn't think that that's an issue. And about a year ago, there was an article that Reuters published looking at the increased cost of extreme weather changes to the insurance industry, where they had to pay out over $20 billion more than they paid the previous year. And that's only going to get worse. And it's going to get worse because of fires, because of hurricanes, flooding, tornadoes. I think that there's a lot of things that we can do. But I really urge you to try to get somebody from CCL. Mark Reynolds is the executive director. He's a great.
He's been on the show, Bill.
I don't get to listen all the time, but he's a great
it's been a while. It's probably been a year or so. We should reach out to him again. I'm with you, Bill. And we should probably also reach out to Bill McKibben with 350.org and the Sunrise Movement. I mean, the Sunrise Movement, young people, is huge, and we need to get them back on too. In fact, this week, I mean, as this new IPCC report is coming out, is a great week to really focusing on this. Bill, thank you. Thanks for the reminder. I appreciate it. And like I said, thanks for listening to us on Sirius XM. Jerry in San Francisco. Hey, Jerry, what's up?
Hey, Tom. My wife and I just got back from over a month's back road trips through the West, and we were trying to soak our old bones in some hot springs. But in the meantime, we really got an education on the environment. And I just want to share you one day. Yeah, we stopped by a town in Sierra foothills called Greenville, which no longer exists.
That's in California, Northern California.
That's right. Yeah, it was completely burned down a week ago at least because
Were you
of the
there
Dixie
before
fire.
or after the fire?
Before. So we got a couple of sandwiches and left the town. We didn't spend very much time there and moved on looking for maybe a park to have lunch. But instead we found this unbelievable valley where every tree was burned. The only thing was standing were a grove of 20 burned trees that must have gone up 50 feet, and then one completely unburned pine tree. And you know, when we have photographs of that, it seems inconceivable that that could be. But we went down there, meditated for a little bit, you know, ate our sandwiches, and I was just looking at my shoes completely filled with the debris of this fire that must have taken place 2 or 3 years ago. And looked down, and it goes back to what you were talking about off and on over the last few years about no insects. There was no buzz of insects, and then there were no birds, no chipmunks, no mammals of any kind, because you could see the mountains all around you, 360 degrees. And you sat there, and you said, we're in a dead zone. This is the first time I really felt it.
Yeah, it's Rachel Carson's Silent Spring.
That's right. And every once in a while you'd hear a car off in the distance, but outside of that, there was no sound. And I don't know if you've ever experienced being outside where you heard nothing. It felt like your ears were plugged.
Yeah.
And we moved out of that, and then we came to another place where another town no longer exists, and we were there when it was a fire coming over the mountains about 20 miles north of Reno, a place called Doyle, California. And I think maybe part of Doyle still exists. I don't know. But I had never seen a fire come over a mountain and engulf it so quickly. Now, I know different fires have different, you know, wind speeds and that type of thing, but we barely outran it.
Wow.
It was just going over the ridge and then blowing the direction that we were driving. And so that's just one. I don't want to, you know, use up all the time here, but that's just one day of our trip.
That's incredible.
And then you go into other things about water usage. Utah suing Arizona for stealing their aquifer, and that's a whole nother story. But anyway, I'm really glad you have this topic this morning, Tom, because we all need to get involved.
Thank you, Jerry, and thanks for the story. We have to get active. We all have to get active. Jerry, thank you. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's the place where despair is not an option. Have you gotten active? Have you seen results? We'll be right back. And welcome back. Ryan in Colton, California. Hey, Ryan, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I just wanted to share some of my thoughts about some libertarians that I know.
Oh, my. The Rand Paul tribe.
Well, it's a little bit different than that. A couple of them are fans of Rand Paul, but the three people I wanted to mention were, one is a very, relatively young man, early 30s. He lives out of his van, big environmentalist guy, and he's mostly into it, I think, for the guns and the idea of personal freedom. He's a super hippie, but he loves guns. And the other two are, one is a older artist, late 50s, and I'm not sure exactly what got her into it, but she seems to be a fan of the economic and social policies. And then the third is a college professor friend of mine who I've known for a long time, registered Republican. And he's a bit of a contrarian, but he's not a Rand Paul guy, strangely enough. He holds more to the ideas of Rand that subsidies are bad. So it's an interesting mix. I can't make sense of it all. Other than the professor, I don't know that all of them are that informed about the real policies or the reality of libertarianism.
Yeah. The idea of, the magical free market solving all problems if only the government would get out of the way, I've said this before. When I was 27 years old, I remember that year I spent getting very enthusiastic about libertarianism, and I had a Harry Brown bumper sticker and all this kind of stuff. And in fact, their slogan was "Freedom Works," and which is now the name of one of these right-wing think tanks. And it didn't occur to me when I was in my 20s that if government gets out of the way, that there won't be a marketplace. I mean, government defines the rules of the game of the marketplace, and you have to have that. Otherwise, we're just back to barter and chaos. And what do you do when you give Ralph his, the car that you're going to trade him for a pile of gold coins, and Ralph takes the car and doesn't give you the gold coins? I mean, normally you'd turn to government and say, he just stole from me. But, what do you do in a libertarian world? And, or what do you do if Ralph's, factory is poisoning your children, by dumping stuff in the river?
Yeah, those are very good points. I'm really not sure that my environmentalist friend or that my artist friend realized that they would be, that they wouldn't live in the world with either the freedom to sell their art or have a decent place to even do their art or anything like that.
Because the only solution libertarians have is go to court, right? Which can take years. Just ask anybody who, you've got people who Donald Trump refused to pay back in the 1990s who are still trying to sue him.
Oh, yeah. And what's interesting to me, too, is that none of these people that I mentioned here are Trump supporters. One of them is, in fact, a Bernie guy. So, yeah. Yeah, no, it's seductive. If you get just a little veneer, you can just get the surface of it. It's very seductive. We need to help people do a deep dive and understand what libertarianism really is, where it came from. It was started by fee, this real estate lobby. So that they could deregulate real estate. That's why they started it. Ryan, thank you for the call. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. We have a new video over at ThomHartmann.com for the folks who support our program, and it's this one's a geeky science one, and it's about this little snippet of genetic material, what's called microRNA, and the name of this one is called MIR1, M-I-R-1, and we've known for years that when muscles are used, I'm talking about exercise to the point where you feel fatigue in your muscles, that when when muscles are exercised, it depletes them of MIR1. What they didn't know is where that MIR1 goes and what it does. And it turns out that our fat cells draw the MIR1 in from the muscles, and it causes the fat cells to start converting themselves into fatty acids that can be used to feed the muscles. So we're not just building muscle, but we're also reducing fat in our body. It's absolutely fascinating. I'm going into depth on it in this new video. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Silver Moon in Falls City, Washington. Hey, Silver Moon, what's on your mind today?
I've wanted to call you for a long time because way back in 2004, I was down in Seattle, and I picked up a newspaper called The Connection, and it's an article by you, How Global Warming May Cause the Next Ice Age. And I've always wanted to call you and ask you about this because what you point out in this article, it talks about the whole flow of water that moves all the way around our continent and then drops down deeply into the north, well, way further north, and it keeps Great Britain and Norway, Sweden, it keeps them livable.
All of
and
Europe,
also
actually. Yeah, all of Western Europe, yeah.
And
you're talking about the Gulf Stream and the Great Conveyor Belt. Yeah.
Yes, I am, and it's just an amazing article, and it talks about how quickly glaciation can happen, and that includes even here. That apparently glaciers could build up within a very short cycle.
Yes.
And
within a matter of
I don't
decades
think-
or centuries, yeah. I wonder if the people who wrote and produced that movie, The Day After Tomorrow, which is based on the premise that the Gulf Stream collapses because of all the fresh water coming, melting off the Greenland glaciers, which, by the way, is happening right now. That it collapses, and in the movie, the ice age begins in the course of the 3 days that the movie covers. In reality, it would take 3 to 30 to maybe 300 years, depending on how radically or how rapidly the Great Conveyor Belt crashes. But yeah, and that article, by the way, probably points to my book, The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight, which references that, which I first wrote and published in 1996. And we've updated twice now to reflect the new climate realities. And this is the sort of thing. I mean, they're talking about the Great Conveyor Belt crashing again. There was a piece in The Guardian about it just a couple days ago. I wrote an op-ed about it last week that you can find at hartmannreport.com, titled something about civilization ending climate change may be coming. And if this happens, it's going to hit the United States hard, but it's going to hit Europe a hell of a lot harder. Because that, when just even a little bit of wobble in it seems to affect the crops and the ability to grow crops throughout Europe, particularly in the UK.
Well, it talks about in this article about what brought the sudden disappearance of summer period, that the warm water currents of the Great Conveyor Belt had shut down, and once the Gulf Stream was no longer flowing, only a year or 3 for the last of the residual heat held in North Atlantic Ocean to dissipate into the air. That's what really prompted me to keep this article, is that how quickly this can happen. And we're farmers here, and it's interesting. I haven't seen flies, mosquitoes. We just haven't had the normal pests that we usually have. And it just seems very abnormal in general.
Yeah.
This year, especially with the heat.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I wanted to call in because I was, the amount of time that it could take for these glaciers to build up in this article was not that long.
Right.
And that.
And I know a lot. I know a lot more than I knew in 2004 when I wrote that piece, but it's not getting better. It's like, it's we need to do something. We need to be doing something big. And I mean, even the $3.5 trillion bill that Bernie is pushing, and Elizabeth Warren, and now Chuck Schumer and President Biden are pushing, even that is only a small start. We have so much work to do, and we've got to get on it. It's just so important. Silver Moon, thank you for the call, and thank you for reading my work from what was it, 18 years ago, 17 years ago. I've been on this topic, on this story for more than the last week, shall we say. We'll be back. Dave Lindorff is going to drop by very quickly, and then I'll be picking up your phone calls.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Minority Leader, How to Lead from the Outside and Make Real Change by Stacey Abrams. This is from chapter 1, although the introduction is fascinating too, where she talks about, Rhodes scholarships and stuff, but this is chapter 1. I sit in the living room, a cozy space, warm in the early summer. I'm perched on the edge of a sofa next to Valerie, the home's owner, a lovely black woman in her late 40s. Across from us, seated close together on a wide settee meant for one, are her 2 children, a son and a daughter. Politicians rarely visit their streets, which are nestled in a poorer community in South Georgia. Valerie beams with pride that both her children are headed to college in the fall. David, 17, plans to study criminology. Maya, 18, her belly round with her first child, intends to become a middle school teacher. Both newly graduated from high school, Maya will give birth in mere weeks and begin college months later, an unwed teen mother. Her intended school is more than 3 hours north of her home, so her mother will raise her newborn baby while she starts her freshman year. Valerie speaks matter-of-factly about the coming challenge, raising a new child just as hers leaves the nest. Still, she is determined that both her children pursue college degrees that she never received. Maya, the mother-to-be, wonders how she'll do so far away from home and her baby. Yet in the next breath, she explains how college will be the best for her and her child. Their future success rests upon her. I've come to their home as part of my campaign for governor, so I asked Valerie what she expects of someone like me. What can I do to help make lives like hers better? In her soft voice, she replies, she just wants options for financial aid for her children. They will succeed, she says, if they can afford to stay in school. As I look around the modest home passed down through the generations, I understand both the pride and the desperation tangled in her response. She got them through and has given them the tools to carve out better lives for themselves. We chat more about the worries she's lived with all those years, our discussion turning to the crime and poverty in their neighborhood. Then I ask Valerie what she wants. At first, all I get in response is a quizzical look to suggest I need to reconsider my bid for higher office. Or that suggests. I repeat, what do you want for you? What secret dream do you have for yourself? Her confused expression turns to one of surprise. I don't know, she tells me. I've been a cashier at the Piggly Wiggly for 20 years. You must want something, I probe, something you'd like to do for you? A daycare, she admits quietly. I'd like to start a daycare center for unwed mothers like my daughter, so more girls can finish school and pursue their dreams. But that ambition is beyond her. Her body language, her tone of voice, her averted gaze speak louder than her words. I press her, but she demurs with a smile. Let's just see what happens if you win the governor's job, she says. Valerie's house in South Georgia is not too different from the squat red brick house where I grew up on South Street in Gulfport, Mississippi. An oak tree grew out in our front yard, shadowing the front sidewalk, forbidding grass to grow beneath its shade. Pink azaleas bloomed each spring from bushes that flanked the front door. Our rented house and the others set close by teemed with children, all black, all working class. We played in our postage-stamped yards, make believing the fantastical. Superhero exploits, cops and robbers. As we got older, we'd talk about moving to New Orleans or living in one of the mansions along the beachfront that lay less than 5 miles away, across the railroad tracks that ran in between our neighborhood and the more wealthy environs. We dreamed of more, while our parents' lives centered around survival and making it from paycheck to paycheck. Instinctively, we understood that more had to be possible, even if we didn't know what to do to get there. These imaginings, these desires, are the roots of ambition. As adults, like Valerie, we tend to edit our desires until they fit our construction of who we're supposed to become. In such a world, I wouldn't dare dream of running for higher office, for mayor or governor or president. At least for now, Valerie sees herself retiring in 20 more years from Piggly Wiggly as a cashier, rather than as a small business owner who helps the community raise its children. From our brief meeting, I could see she had the fire, albeit of a low burn, of a minority leader. She had ambition, she had vision, but she didn't have the faith, and understandably so. Whether we come from working class neighborhoods or grow up comfortably middle class, minorities rarely come of age explicitly thinking about what we want and how to get it. People already in power almost never have to think about whether they belong in the room, much less if they would be listened to once outside. These men, and they are usually men and typically white, do not have to grapple with low expectations based on gender or race or class. Ambition for them begins with reminiscences of old times and older friendships or newer alliances. The ends have already been decided. Only the means are to be discussed. Most potential minority leaders feel the same lack of faith Valerie had, at least at some point in their evolution. We may not know how to get the first job, let alone make it to the big chair. We don't know how to take the leap from accepting our fates to actually changing them, and not just a little, but radically. Then there are those who simply don't know what they want. The drive to achieve burns inside, often without a clear target. We want to be something, but what that is remains hazy. Often we cannot articulate our goals because they lie just beyond the reach of who we're supposed to be. Ambition's scale is irrelevant. What holds us back is not scope, it's fear. And because we don't know what to call our dreams, don't know how to make them happen, or are pretty sure we'll be disappointed, we just stand still. But becoming a minority leader demands that we embrace ambition as our due. Stacey Abrams.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back to the third hour of our program. On the line with us is Dave Lindorff. Dave is an investigative journalist, a contributor to The Nation, also the author of several books, including The Case for Impeachment, and the founder of thiscan'tbehappening.net. This particular article you can find at The Nation. Are toxic coastal landfills going to kill us all? I mean, this is pretty alarming stuff. Dave, welcome back to the program. How many landfills are there in the United States, and how many of them are near our coasts, and why should we worry about that?
The best estimate comes from some decade or so ago from the EPA, which has paid very little attention to them, that there are 100,000 landfills in the country, and that half of them, approximately, so 50,000, lie in the 30-odd counties that border one of the nation's coasts.
That would include rivers, or just ocean coasts? No,
that's just coastlines, Atlantic, Gulf, and Pacific, and Hawaii and Alaska are on the Pacific, so they're included. These are all landfills that are within 10 feet, within 10-foot sea level of the ocean. That's kind of the defining of being on the coast.
So the assumption is then that if global warming caused sea level rise, and the sea level is rising, but it's just been a few centimeters in the last few years, but if that starts becoming inches and then feet, that these landfills will be infiltrated with water, that the toxic waste in them will spread to other places, that it'll poison. I mean, what's the outcome?
Well, the initial thing that will happen is that the bottoms will be infiltrated, because most of these landfills, all but a few thousand of them, are legacy landfills that never had liners on the bottom. They just were the way, people would dig a trench or have a gravel pit or something, and they'd just start filling it up. Or later, they started piling them on the coast. They've always been piled up on the land, because if you dig down a foot or two, you're in water. So the first thing that'll happen is you'll have salt infiltration into the bottoms, which can lift them up or destroy any kind of pumping systems they have to try to keep them dry. But later, the worst problems are going to be surface water coming in, so that these mounds of garbage will become islands of garbage, and then they get wrecked by the waves, and the dirt comes off, the plastic tops get destroyed if they're there, and they all end up in the water, in coastal waters that are very important and vulnerable.
We're not talking about being concerned about a 1925 refrigerator floating out to sea here. This is much more than that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, everything went into these dumps historically. These are dumps that can go back 150 years, and every county has them, multiple of them. And some towns had, many landfills. They'd use up one, they'd start another. and bury the first one, forget where it was, maybe. And the thing is that when America was more industrialized, you had companies everywhere doing chemical work, doing, work that involved oil solvents, paints, everything. And it all went into the dump. They didn't have any rules about what could go in a dump. That started in the 1980s, that the federal government started putting restrictions on what could go in a landfill, one of the few rules they've made about landfills. So we don't even know. Nobody had to log what they put in. If you had chemical companies or companies that used chemicals in your community, that company just drove trucks up and dumped it into the dump.
Wow. So what do we do about this, Dave?
Well, the best thing to do, and what Hank Wanless, the expert on sea level rise at University of Miami, told me is the only real solution, is to move these things before they're inundated, because it'll be real expensive to move them after the water starts surrounding them. And that's a huge job. I mean, I've heard estimates of about $1 trillion to move them all the vulnerable ones. Although that's over maybe a period of 20 to 30 years if you triage it right and move the ones that need to be moved first. And so it isn't as much money as it sounds like.
And if this doesn't get done, and I'm guessing in all probability it won't, I mean, we're talking climate change remediation. I think that they're going to be putting money into moving buildings and people long before they put it into moving landfills. If this doesn't happen, it's going to what? Poison the oceans? Is that the concern? I mean, we were dumping this stuff in the oceans for a long time, too.
The ocean's pretty big. I don't think that's the major problem. The problem is that the wetlands get poisoned, and they're already being, they're extremely vulnerable because they're starting to get red tides and all of that from the increased heat. And the thing about wetlands is that aside from the fact that people live in them and that they feed the water table for people to get drinking water and stuff, they also are where about 70% of the sea life in the ocean have some part of their breeding cycle. They either lay their eggs there or they function as nurseries so that the young of whatever species you're talking about, from clams and shellfish to, major fish and turtles and all of that, have to have that, they either have to grow up there, they either breed there, they swim through and go upriver like salmon and eels and shad, or most of them just have their young there, lay their eggs, and then the young grow up through one summer or 1 year, and then they swim out to sea.
Yeah. Now, you're talking about the United States. The study that I saw in this article that you wrote for The Nation, and we're talking with Dave Lindorff, who's got this new piece in The Nation, the investigative journalist and contributor to The Nation, titled Toxic Coastal Landfills, Are They Going to Kill Us All Off? You cited a study in Great Britain. I mean, this is happening literally all over the world, and I would think that it's particularly bad in low-lying island nations. The Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, like that. Is there any? Is the IPC? Well, maybe it's not the IPCC's charge. Is the UN looking at this? I mean, is anybody taking this seriously?
Nobody is taking it seriously. I mean, the problem with the international picture, which is in some ways more horrible than the U.S., is that we and Europe are dumping our garbage in coastal communities in places like Ghana and Cameroon and stuff that it's right on the water, and so we're contributing to all of that. The Philippines and Indonesia, as you mentioned, the third world countries are happy to take the garbage. Some of them, and it used to be China, they stopped. But it's a source of income for them, and it's cheaper for us to ship that stuff there than to use a landfill.
So what do we? So the message for the people who are listening or watching the program, other than "Holy crap, there's another one," is what? We raise this with our elected officials? Is there something to point to? Is there a group that's working on this?
Well,
Well, there aren't any groups. When I did this story, everybody said, whoa, I didn't think of that. You know, even coastal defense groups said, whoa, we didn't think about the landfills. It's incredible. And it's not seen as sometimes if they'd see it in the air dump, they didn't see it in the larger picture, you know. So I think the first thing that has to be done, and the EPA actually recognized it, and I have a quote in the piece from the EPA saying, in writing, they would only see me in writing, and they said, you know, we realize this is serious. We realize that something needs to be done about it. And we realize there should be a study to log where all these landfills are and what's in them. But then they said, the EPA has no plans to do a study. And I'm thinking, what?
Well, it's probably because they have no resources.
Well, yeah, but that's really, now that shouldn't be true. And that's a cheap thing to do, and find out what the risks are and what's in the what's
so
in these
encourage
dumps.
your elected officials to encourage the EPA to do a study about the dumps, the landfills all around our coasts. That's the bottom line.
That's a start.
Okay, that's a great start. And as a start, go read Dave's piece at thenation.com. Dave Lindorff. Thank you, Dave.
Thanks for having me on, Tom.
The Thom Hartmann Program.
It is absolutely my pleasure, David, and anytime. We will be right back. And welcome back. Darren in Long Island, New York. Hey, Darren, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
How you doing? I just wanted to bring up a point about the COVID and all the right-wing echo chamber. I know the talking heads on TV all spreading this, you know, false information about don't get vaccines, masks are free. No, masks are masking your freedom. You know, and I'm wondering if, you know, that can be, I wonder if that can be viewed maybe by states, individual states, as a pump and dump scam. If it becomes known that all of this talk is coming from people who situated their stocks properly so that they would get rich.
So just for people who don't know what we're talking about, Darren, pump and dump scams are where the scammer has access to a large social network or is willing to invest, you know, a few $1,000s in Facebook ads. And they buy a large position in a penny stock, in a cheap stock, a stock that's selling for 5 cents a share. And so they buy, you know, hundreds of thousands of shares of it. Not enough to move the price, but enough to be in a great position if that stock goes up. Then they run these ads that look like news stories talking about how Acme Dynamics is about to explode. They have a corner of the market on rhodium in you know, wherever. And all these small investors go, oh, hey, it's a cheap stock. I'll buy $1,000 worth. And pretty soon you've got, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars pouring into this one particular little stock. Its price goes up to $2 a share. The people who started the pump and dump scam sell their shares to those new investors, walk away with millions or tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, and then as soon as they walk away and the story fades, the stock collapses back down to 2 cents a share and everybody got screwed. Correct me if I've wrongly described this. So you're suggesting that they would be investing in stocks like Amazon, for example, or Grubhub. I don't know if they're publicly traded, but, you know, companies that did well as a consequence of the pandemic, as opposed to companies like, you know, restaurant chains and hotels and airlines that do poorly during the pandemic. Is that what you're talking about, Darren?
I think you're the professional here, but yes, that's you put it exactly. Exactly. This is a pump and dump. This is all this is.
Very interesting.
That's what it boils down to. That's what I'm seeing here, and it's being done the technological way to where it works today.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it's being done. That's why they're all together and they're all in on it together, and that's a conspiracy. So
yeah.
The conspiracy, that's RICO indictable, isn't it?
In theory, if you could prove the stock part of it, it would be, you know, you'd almost have to go back and look at the stock trading activities of the major Republicans who have been promoting the idea that we shouldn't wear masks and we shouldn't get vaccinated, and see if there's something there. I mean, I can build a case, and I think anybody could build a strong case, that they're trying to crash the economy so that Joe Biden will have his reputation tarnished. And in fact, his approval rate is going down right now as this virus gets worse. They're trying to hurt Joe Biden, and they don't care how many people die in the process. But whether they're also trying to drive up Amazon's stock in the process because they're sitting on a pile of it, I don't know. You know, that would be a heck of a lot harder to prove. But it's an interesting theory, Darren. It's a real interesting theory. And, you know, hopefully somebody who's real into this is listening and might do the research necessary. Or you could. Darren, thanks for the call. Pump and dump. I love it. I love it. We got some of the most thoughtful people out there. We'll be back in 1 minute. Stick around. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. We try to have a lot of content over at thomhartmann.com. And of course, every day my daily rant goes up at hartmannreport.com. No advertising, no fee or anything like that. You can even get it pushed out to your email box for free. But we also have, podcasts available that are free through wherever your favorite podcast provider may be, or the full 3 hour program. It's a 1 hour podcast, the one that's free out there. There's also the 3 hour podcast available at thomhartmann.com. And we have a special video this week for supporters of the Thom Hartmann program. It's over at thomhartmann.com about the 62 worst members of the U.S. House of Representatives and Josh Hawley in the Senate. These are the people who voted against the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which passed the Senate and the House overwhelmingly. But these 62 members of the House did what is just awful. You can check it out at thomhartmann.com. And we'll welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And I guess I've already flagged this IPCC report. Jeffrey Rosen has testified behind closed doors. How do you think this is going to play out? I am astonished, on the one hand, that we are learning now that there was a guy inside the Justice Department, Jeffrey Clark, who reported to Jeffrey Rosen, the acting Attorney General, who arguably didn't even have the authority to be the acting Attorney General. He wasn't, Senate approved, but Trump had him there anyway. And Trump thought that Rosen was going to have his back. Because Bill Barr had, when Trump came to Bill Barr and said, I want you to help me steal the election by publicly saying that it was a fraudulent election so that we can get the Republican-controlled swing states where there's Republicans controlling their legislature, even if they have a Democratic governor, states like Wisconsin and Michigan and, in this case, it turned out to be Georgia and Arizona. If we can get those states to call a special session of their legislatures, and the Republicans in those legislatures simply say, it doesn't matter how the people in our state voted, it doesn't matter that they voted for Joe Biden, we are going to award the electoral votes, the Electoral College votes for our state. We're going to award those votes to Donald Trump. And had this plan worked, Donald Trump would be president right now. And I probably wouldn't be on the air. I mean, look at when autocrats come to power, Viktor Orban, Vladimir Putin. I mean, long-term autocrats like the UAE and Saudi Arabia, they do not tolerate dissent by and large. Or if they do, it's so marginalized that it's just like, well, yes, we have dissent here. Look, there's that one guy he stands on the street corner every day with a sign. We don't arrest him. I mean, that's how it works. That's where we'd be at. This is what Tucker Carlson is openly advocating when he goes to Hungary and pushes Viktor Orban. And then he asks Viktor Orban about China, and Orban doesn't give him the answer that, the answer that he wants. And then Orban's press in Hungary censors Tucker Carlson, who I guarantee tonight, well, I can't guarantee, but tonight in all probability on his program, now that he's back in the USA, he's going to be talking about the wonders of Hungary and their free press. And oh, yeah, right. But anyhow, this guy, Jeffrey Clark, actually wrote the letter to the governors and the legislatures of Arizona and Michigan and Wisconsin and Ohio and Pennsylvania and Georgia saying, call your legislature into special session. And if you have a Democratic governor like Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, you don't even need the governor's permission. You Republicans who control the House and Senate in those states because of gerrymandering, you Republicans can call yourself into special session and award your electoral votes to Donald Trump. And he was going to do this. He had the letter ready to go. He had the names of all the people to send it to. This is an attempted coup. It's an attempt to end democracy in the United States. It's an attempt to replace the guy who won the election, Joe Biden, both the electoral votes and the popular vote by 7 million. Won the electoral vote by, I think it was 47 votes. An attempt to replace him with Donald Trump, the guy who lost the popular vote in both elections. He lost in 2016 by 3 million votes. He lost in 2020 by 7 million votes. He won the Electoral College back in 2016 by, with 74,000 votes in 5 states, which is just like, kind of, you look up, winning by the skin of your teeth or cat's whisker or whatever, pick your cliche in the dictionary, and what do you see? A picture of the 2016 election. By the way, we can't say this often enough, and you need to memorize this and say it every time you have an opportunity. The last Republican president who came into office, now I say came into office because George W. Bush got reelected he actually won the majority in 2004, but he didn't in 2000. The last Republican president who came into office with a majority of the popular vote was George Herbert Walker Bush in 1988. It has been over 30 years since a Republican actually gained the White House by winning the popular vote in the United States. That's how unpopular Republicans are. This is how, the Electoral College and gerrymandering are the things that are holding them in power pretty much exclusively. And the Senate, each state having 2 senators. So there was this actual plan inside the Department of Justice, and we came that close. And I'm wondering why we don't have screaming headlines, Trump attempts treason, in newspapers all over America.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I mean, this is so much bigger than trying to cover up the break-in of the DNC, which is what, they nailed Richard Nixon for. This is huge.
Today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by Alan J. Lichtman, and it's titled Repeal the Second Amendment, The Case for a Safer America. This from the introduction, titled A Book That Must Be Written. On April 28, 1996, 28-year-old Martin Bryant stopped at an inn near his home of Newtown in Tasmania, Australia, and shot to death its 2 owners. He then drove to the former penal colony and tourist attraction of Port Arthur, where he lunched at a cafe. After eating, Bryant pulled from his sports bag a semi-automatic rifle with a 30-round magazine that he had legally purchased through a newspaper ad. With no provocation, he began firing at patrons in the cafe and its gift shop. Before the police stopped his shooting spree, Bryant had murdered 35 and wounded 18 others. His motive remains unknown. There were people everywhere, bodies, said witness Lynn Beavis. I thought at the time, being a nurse, I've seen dead people, I've seen blood, I've seen things like this, but what I saw in there, nobody but perhaps a soldier would know what that was like. The leadership of a shocked nation responded to the Port Arthur massacre, not with thoughts and prayers, but with decisive action. The country's conservative-led government rebuffed their gun lobby and its American ally, the NRA, to adopt comprehensive national gun controls. In a 2015 broadside labeled Australia, There Will Be Blood, the NRA charged that those regulations, which Australia significantly tightened as of 2002, have, quote, robbed Australians of their right to self-defense and empowered criminals. If the NRA was right, America, with its lax control over firearms for alleged self-defense, should be one of the world's safest countries, certainly far safer than Australia, where criminals presumably evade gun controls to prey on defenseless, law-abiding citizens. Yet in the latest reporting year, gun homicides claimed 14,542 American lives, compared to 27 in Australia. And all homicides took 19,510 American lives, compared to 222 in Australia. Since the NRA issued its warning, firearm homicides have declined in Australia, while soaring by 3,534 in the U.S. An American is now over 30 times more likely per capita than an Australian to be murdered by a gun, and 7 times more likely to be murdered by any means. If we had rates comparable today to Australia's, some 14,000 American lives would have been saved from firearm homicides in 2017 alone. By the gun lobby's twisted logic, Japan, which has one of the world's strictest gun control laws, should be drenched in innocent blood. Yet out of a population of 127 million, shooters in Japan murdered only 3 persons and injured only 5 in firearm assaults throughout 2017. Australia and Japan are not outliers. As compared to residents of our closest peer democracies in the G7 group of nations plus Australia, an American in 2017 was over 20 times more likely to die from a gun homicide. The gun lobby would have you forget that gun deaths are not limited to murders. In 2017, 23,854 Americans died from gun suicides, 64% more than were killed in firearm homicides. As compared to the peer nations, the 2017 per capita rate of firearm suicides in the United States was 7 times higher, while the rate of suicides by other means was 40% lower. These other democracies all have strict firearm regulations. None has a constitutional right to keep or bear arms, a distinction the United States shares worldwide only with Guatemala, whose gun murder rate is the 3rd highest of some 195 nations worldwide. Why has America lagged behind the democratic world in protecting its citizens from needless death and injury? The culprit is not spending by the NRA on campaigns and lobbying, which other pressure groups exceeded. The real problem is that which gun control advocates fear to name, the Second Amendment. Led by the NRA, the gun lobby exploits a historically defective, perverse reinvention of this amendment to inspire their grassroots supporters, sell guns, and provide constitutional cover for their opposition to making us safer by regulating firearms. The competing movement for gun control has floundered in response to the gun lobby's triumphant marketing of the Second Amendment. Gun control advocates have righteous zeal and noble motives, but lack a winning strategy. Instead of forthrightly refuting the lobby's bogus claims, the gun control movement has instead fallen into the trap of lamely insisting, "Oh, we support the Second Amendment, but we also support responsible gun control." With such a self-defeating strategy, the movement can never win. It plays on the gun lobby's home turf and fails to rally the American majority that favors stricter firearms regulations. It provokes only scorn from a gun lobby that dismisses yes but assurances as rank hypocrisy, and it ignores the clear history and the true meaning of the Second Amendment itself. The movement for gun control must strike hard with a new strategy. Repeal of the Second Amendment is not only right, but realistic. It would break open the political logjam and open a path for the comprehensive national gun control and safety measures that have eluded the American people for so long. None of these measures would confiscate firearms or stop Americans from using guns for hunting, sport shooting, antique collecting, or legitimate self-defense. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of the free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. These form the Second Amendment. The book Repeal the Second Amendment by Alan J. Lichtman.
Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. In addition to the free newsletter that we have over at thomhartmann.com, which gives you literally a link to every story or article I've talked about throughout the day, every day, comes into your email box every day, there's no charge. In addition to that, and my daily rants, which are free of advertising and free of charge over at HartmannReport.com, we also produce a weekly video. This week's video is about how power companies around the country, for-profit power companies 100% of the time, these power companies around the country are making it harder and harder and more expensive for people to install solar in their homes. All kinds of ways of trying to block people from doing this. And increasingly, they're getting support from Republican politicians, both at the local and the state level. It's something that we really need to know about, we need to be paying attention to, and we need to be aggressively pushing back on. You can check it out over at ThomHartmann.com and at HartmannReport.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and a lot going on. Elizabeth in Huntington, West Virginia. Hey, Elizabeth, what's on your mind today?
The utility companies, water, electricity, and gas, deliberately scam the elderly. We do not get our bills like we did when we were younger, and then they shut off your utilities, which we need, such as water and electricity. I have an oxygen machine. My water just got shut off. Guess what? I didn't have the bill for last month.
Oh, my. You need to, Elizabeth, most of these companies offer either paper billing or online billing, and maybe they're defaulting to online billing to, to save the money, but you need to contact your utilities and ask them to send you paper bills in the mail. They will do it.
They weren't coming, so I put automatic pay in it. Guess who doesn't take out the automatic pay?
Yeah. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. Elizabeth.
They are really scamming the elderly when we find ourselves thanking God when we make it to the bathroom on time.
Elizabeth, there are two things that I would strongly suggest you do. The first is, as I said, contact your water and electric companies and tell them exactly what happened. And number two, contact your Public Utility Commission. Every state has one. They may go by a different name. I don't know the name in West Virginia, but it's probably the Public Utilities Commission. And that's the place where you can complain and raise issues about your utilities. And then number three, I would strongly suggest, even though your representative in the U.S. House of Representatives is a Republican, that you contact that person and tell them what's going on and ask them for their help. Good luck, Elizabeth. I wish you the very best on that. Bobby in La Puente, California. Hey, Bobby, what's on your mind today?
Climate change. Mm-hmm. Okay, you talked a while back about the insects a year ago. And I noticed this year, we go to war with ants. We get ready, cornmeal, no ants. Okay, really, insects, grasshoppers. I grow sunchokes, Jerusalem artichokes. You eat the root, for diabetes. Grasshoppers, no grasshoppers. I got a garden in the back. All lettuce, you name it. Okay, we have squirrels, untouched. No insects. Honestly, then I call a friend in East L.A., I had no ants this year. You know what? Same here. Disappearing. Yeah. The birds, crows, you could call it Crow Town. They're gone. Yeah. Okay, one came by the other morning wishing they would raid my garden. Please, have at it. Eat what you want. They just went by. It is weird. I mean, I know it's changing the world. Recreational, the mountains. I take my granddaughter, let's go cool off. There's no water. I don't know if anybody lives in the San Gabriel Valley. It's different. I don't like to alarm my wife, but people, wake up. There's so much going on, Tom. Throw a dart. You got the Republican greedies working on their 7 deadly sins on steroids. Then the lady they called in, have her water shut off. It hurts. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I feel guilty because, I have a pension. I pay my bills. But for others, I feel something has to be done. The creator, the universe has to listen. Then Greg Palast last week, when I listened to him, the little boy went into a river to swim, picked up his son, the tribal chief died in his arms. And I'm thinking, I have a 7-year-old. A lot of us have grandchildren and children. Imagine that.
Yeah.
Man, that made me angry. Chevron out of greed. But they'll pay a price themselves. You know what I mean? They will.
Sadly, the world is paying the price. And
yes.
Yeah, and it's not, and you know, as grim as this is, we can't just sit around and hold hands and mourn it or sing Kumbaya. We need to get active. There may, you know, it's entirely possible we've passed tipping points that can't be reversed, and at the very best, we're going to be living in a world that is, you know, a lot deader than it used to be and a lot different than it used to be. At the very worst, you know, our grandchildren may see a time when even human beings go away. But if there is any chance that our activism can slow down this freight train or stop it or even better reverse it, we have to do it, Bobby. We have to do it.
We starts with personal. Me, I don't drive the car that often. Water, my utilities. I'm a conservative. My gas bill, $20. What's your electric bill? One time, wow, $86. But I've always lived this way. Frugal. I got what I need.
Yeah.
As far as activism, my wife gets on the computer. She's my right hand. Whatever letters you have, she sends them out. Me, smoke signals. That's our modern smoke signals, the computer.
There you go.
So that's what we try to do our part. So thank you for the education and your callers. Bless them. Honest. Yeah. I love you guys.
Thank you, Bobby.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank
and your wife and the crew.
Yeah. Thank you.
Take care.
So nice to hear from you. Ken in La Center, Washington. Hey, Ken, what's up?
Yeah, Tom, go back to climate change. I read the news about the ocean currents last week, and I recognized that it was something that was discussed in the Robert Felix book, Not by Fire, but by Ice.
Oh, that was back around the turn of the century, too. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was at the same time reading about new physics, and I came up with an idea that you know, people may be confused about weather and climate. Weather's like sunshine and rainfall. You can measure it over time and graph it, and you can that graph is a linear system. But with climate, you have too many factors, and it's a dynamic system. So you use chaos theory, and in chaos theory, it's like you have a pendulum, and you push the pendulum, it swings one way and then the other. You keep pushing it every time, you add more energy to it. Eventually, it's going to lock into one side or the other. So either hot, cold, wet, dry. But you can't know because of, you know, at the quantum level, there's quantum uncertainty. You really can't predict. You can only you know, estimate what the end result's going to be. So it could be, you know.
That's why they were always predicting within ranges, but the ranges are getting more and more and more extreme, and you know, and more frightening. It's tough stuff. Ken, thank you. Bill in Naperville, Illinois. Hey, Bill, what's up?
Hi. About protecting voter rights, the Article 4 and Section 4 says that the United States government will guarantee a Republican form of government in all the states. So I was wondering, could the Democrats put together a funding bill to open polling places all over the country, you know, multiple places in all the states, fund it themselves and staff it and fund the staffing themselves. So when it goes into be voted on, it goes into reconciliation instead of having to deal with filibusters. What do you think?
I think the Senate parliamentarian would blow it out of the water because it's not specifically, you know, about, well, you're saying put a funding mechanism in it, but you know, I think this is going to be the problem that they're going to have with the $3.5 trillion bill too. And they may just have to fire the parliamentarian and get, you know, like Trent Lott did back in 2001, I think it was, and get a parliamentarian who will, you know, get along and go along. But you know, you've got that guarantee of Republican government in Article 4. You also have an Article 1 where it says that the individual states shall determine the time and place of and you know, basically systems of election in the states, but Congress may at any time write legislation, I'm paraphrasing here, may write legislation that overrides the states. And that was the essence of the op-ed that I wrote last week about the importance of Congress actually passing something. That's what the Help America Vote Act did. That's what the Motor Voter Act of 1994, I think it was, did, the National Voter Registration Act. And we need a new one that unambiguously, clearly, loudly, emphatically says there is an absolute right to vote. And when the Republicans play all these games, you know, of moving districts around, and you can, if you go to the wrong place, your vote doesn't count, or if you go on the, you know, if your middle name isn't the same, your vote doesn't count, or if your signature has changed over the years, even if you can prove your identity. I mean, it's nuts, and I think they're violating our constitutional rights to vote, and we need to have laws that specifically say that. Bill, thank you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
45 minutes past the hour, occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. Thom Hartmann with you. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Roger in Eugene, Oregon. Hey, Roger, what's on your mind today?
Well, what's on my mind, I keep thinking about Tom Mouse Jefferson and all the winters that it's been since he was alive. But anyhow, when you have solar on your roof as opposed to paying your utility company, when you pay your bill by the utility company, you are paying it with after-tax income. So when they start talking about the savings you're going to get from your solar utility, remember you are not paying the solar panels with after-tax income. Once you've got your solar panels on the roof, the quote price you're paying for your solar, you have to account and add like 20% or 25 or 30% to what your utility bill would have been when you start figuring your long-term payment rate.
It's a good point. I would say, though, that you have to also, if you're going to pursue that to its logical end, you also have to add that to your initial costs. I mean, if your normal electric bill over the course of a year is, say, $3,000 a year, and you buy a system that costs, let's say, $9,000, at the end of 3 years, now you're not paying anything for electricity, and you've paid off your system, and in the future you're saving essentially pre-tax dollars as well as post-tax dollars. But the $9,000 that you paid for that system also was post-tax, and that's where they could change that. I mean, you know, in some states give you tax credits, you know, which kind of reverses that. But making just the simple act of making the purchase of any kind of solar system at the federal level a tax-deductible expense would be huge.
Well, I mean, you do get, I think I got the 26% credit from, you know, the last taxes number. But what I'm looking at is when the salesman comes to talk to you, they say, oh, you're paying $100 a month for your energy use right now.
Right.
Once you get your solar system, it's going to take you 15 years to pay it off. But they're not considering that $100 is actually $125. And yeah, when you put your system on the roof, you pay with after-tax dollars. The same thing when you buy a car, you're doing it with after-tax dollars.
Right.
But I just think that there's this little niche of about 25 to 28% of what you're paying that you no longer pay in the bills to the utility company.
Right, based on your income tax bracket.
Yeah.
And for people who are low income and therefore they're not paying income taxes, or the amount of income tax that they're paying is negligible, that's why they built in the tax credits. So, you know, if somebody's kind of living on the edge but they own their own house and they want to solarize it, they can still do that at very little expense because the federal government will backstop them with actual cash.
Now, wait a minute. You can only get that tax credit against taxes you owe.
Are you sure?
And yes, and any you can't use that tax year can be carried over to the future.
I think you're wrong, Roger. I think tax credits.
I am 100% correct on that one because I just put the solar system on, got my tax refund this year, and am carrying forward more.
Interesting. Okay, I'll have to.
Anyhow, thank you.
Go ahead.
Bye.
Okay, thank you, Roger. Thank you very much for the call. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be right back. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. Hey, we have a new video over at thomhartmann.com. It's about this movement that has, it's being characterized in the media as being just, fringe wackadoodles, crazy people on YouTube, stuff like that, who are talking about how Democrats are torturing children to get the adrenochrome out of them, and Hillary Clinton is eating babies, and the ship in the Suez Canal, and how, the really interesting one now, how if you get the vaccine for COVID, that it will change your race. Yes, something that will make white people absolutely hysterical. The problem is, this isn't just the Flat Earth Society. These aren't the people that we used to laugh at. This isn't just a few crazies on the edge. They just had a convention in Oklahoma. A serious convention where they were calling for Democrats to be put in front of a firing squad and shot. You need to check this out. It's over at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Ramesu in Birmingham, Alabama. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right.
Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Good.
I just want you to know I'm a huge fan of the show. I'm a continuing contributor.
To Free Speech TV. Thank you.
Of course. Speaking of climate change and the political situation in this country, we overlooking, I think, the elephant in the room, which is capitalism.
Yep.
I mean, capitalism is what drives this fascist right. I mean, capitalism is what caused these politicians, I won't name any, West Virginia, to vote. I mean, just, we have to protect the filibuster. It's silliness. Climate change is being, just on steroids because this desire for more and more and more and more money. It's such a made-up thing.
Well, climate change isn't a made-up thing, but the denial of it is certainly a made-up thing. And your points are very well made, Ramesu. And thank you for your participation in this conversation. Dina in Snyder, Texas. Hey, Dina, what's on your mind today? Dina? Oh my, Dina must be listening to her TV and not her phone. Mark in Indianapolis, Indiana. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I watched this show on CNN about a month ago about nuclear, the new technology in nuclear energy. Mm-hmm. And I think it made a lot of sense because when you look at solar and you look at wind, renewable, it's not always there. I pass a very large wind farm in northern Indiana a lot, and a lot of times the windmills are just sitting there. They're not even moving.
Right.
So this show made a lot of sense that these new technology of nuclear power plants, not the old white elephants that cost billions and billions, but I just think that I worked in both gas and electric utilities for years, but I think we're going to have to get to the numbers and the coverage.
There are no, to the best of my knowledge, Mark, there are no commercial-grade nuclear power plants that don't require mining of uranium, which is deadly to the people around where it lives and is very fossil fuel intensive, purification of the uranium, which is very fossil fuel intensive, transportation of the fissile materials to the power plant, and then disposal of the waste thereafter. There are no systems that are commercially viable right now. I realize that, you know, you've got these thorium reactors and these pebble reactors and things like this that they're experimenting with in a small scale, and fusion as well. And it will be great if they can develop something. But right now, there is no thing out there, and therefore, I think it's really important that we keep our mind and our eye on the things that we know do work. Solar, geothermal, wind, wave power, I mean, and possibly even methane production from landfills and things. There's a lot out there. Jeff in Gurnee, Illinois. Hey, Jeff, what's on your mind?
Hey, here's where I'm going on environmental. You know, there's an environmental protection agency, and they'll say, well, your car's got to get so many miles per gallon, or certain. There's a whole safety division of that too. But you know, on a large company standard, who tells the airlines what they can do with the fuel, or who tells anyone that
the
what
EPA does?
As long as they've got the money to buy it. So, in other words, if there's 50 flights going to New York out of LA every day, are they all filled? Could there be 30? You know, something. In other words, whoever's got the money to buy the fuel just uses it. It's just like Bezos's rocket or the other guy's rocket. Well, he's got the money to buy it, but there's no responsibility for the purchase of the fuel. They just go and do what they want.
Well, this is why we need a carbon tax, Jeff. Carbon tax easily solves that entire situation, and if you do it where the money, the revenue from the tax is given back to people who earn less than $50,000 as a rebate, so that because it is going to increase the cost of gasoline, so that they can still get to work, you know, and you know, the cost of the increased cost of fossil fuels not only doesn't hurt them but actually profits them, then you've got a really sweet little system there. The problem is you've got, you know, every Republican is opposed to it because they're owned by the fossil fuel billionaires, and a couple of Democrats as well, like Joe Manchin.
Right. Well, the thing is, too, is another thing that can be instantly done. I think this has been talked about before. You know, like with a school district. Okay, the school district's got 50 buses. Well, you tell them, next, you know, if you want the money from the state or whatever, you know, like 10% of the fleet's going to be an all-electric bus. They are actually out there. The same goes with the mail trucks. You've got to start small, and you can build up into a system that says, okay, now we're at 10%, and in a few more years, we want your fleet to be 40%.
I agree. It was in 2006. It was in 2005 that the post office announced that they were going to electrify 400,000 vehicles across the country. They have the largest single fleet of you know, individually owned fleet of vehicles in the country. And that was when the Republicans in Congress said, oh, no, you don't. You put $5 billion a year aside every year for people who are going to retire at 75 years. A phony baloney program to shut down the electrification of the post office. It was amazing. Thank you for the call. Anyhow, we're out of time. We'll be back tomorrow, same bat time, same bat place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. Seriously, it does. Check out my rant about this at HartmannReport.com. You'll see what I'm talking about. It works. Tag, you're it.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit ThomHartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.